Chapter 76. Emote Consumer. Whoa, Vaughn whispered after the expensive beat finished. Patch laughed heartily, spinning in his chair. Yeah, I'm good with my stuff. I don't touch a board unless I know I can make the speakers bleed. Now it's up to you to deliver. You ready? Vaughn nodded, shaking out his arms to loosen the tension in his shoulders. He walked toward the heavy glass door Patch was pointing to, the entrance to the isolation booth. It's going in with you? Patch looked at Loki, his eyebrows knitting together in a skeptical frown. She won't make a sound, Vaughn reassured him, stepping into the booth. She's trained, very calm. He had originally planned to leave Loki in the control room to ensure his own concentration, but the Void Links had made her stance very clear via a telepathic image of her shredding his new leather jacket. She was coming. Vaughn closed the heavy door, sealing himself inside. The silence was instant. The acoustic foam on the walls sucked the air out of the room, leaving only the sound of his own breathing. He approached the Newman microphone stand, adjusting the height, and pulled the heavy headphones over his ears. Loki shifted her weight, gripping his shoulder with her claws just enough to stay steady, her violet eyes scanning the pop filter with curiosity. Can you hear me? Patch's voice came through the cans. Loud and clear, Vaughn replied, leaning into the mic. All right, we're doing a scratch track first. Just get a feel for the new beat. Don't overthink it. Give me a level check. The beat dropped. Hum. Vaughn closed his eyes. He let the rhythm wash over him. It was his song, so there was no need to look at a sheet. The synth melody crept in, eerie and low. Vaughn waited for the pocket, then began with the slow, melodic intro. You put the weight on my back and I let you. His voice was calm. In the sterile silence of the booth, stripped of the screaming audience and the stage lights, he could hear every nuance. It was clearer than the live session. He played with the cadence, dragging out the vowels on the emotional lines, letting the rasp in his voice catch naturally. Then came the switch up. The beat accelerated, and he began delivering the rap verses flawlessly. As he finished the last verse, a sudden notification chimed in his peripheral vision. Passive activated. Emotional resonance. Loki has absorbed excess ambient focus. Resonance bar. 1%/100%. Vaughn blinked, looking at the cat on his shoulder. 1%? He looked through the glass. In the control room, Emily was leaning forward, staring intently at him. Patch had his eyes glued to the waveform monitor, analyzing the peaks and valleys of the audio. Concentration is a dry flavor, but it sustains me. Do it again. Make them feel something stronger. I want the spicy stuff. Vaughn shook his head slightly, amused and bewildered, so she really did eat the vibe of the room. Okay, cut. Patch's voice interrupted his thoughts. The music cut out. Vaughn looked through the glass. How was it? Patch spun his chair around, pressing the talkback button. Technically, it was clean. You hit the notes, your timing is good, but it's polite. You sound like a guy who's annoyed, not a guy who just got robbed of $1 million. Patch paused, scratching his dreadlocks. Your vocal range sits comfortably in the midtones. It's not bad, actually. For a rookie, it's solid. We can work with this. We'll layer it, add some reverb, maybe double-track the chorus to give it weight. It was a professional way of saying, you're good, but you're not great. Vaughn frowned. So it's average. It's industry standard, Patch corrected. But if you want a hit, we need more. Vaughn nodded slowly. He hadn't used emote when singing after all. He grabbed the bottle of water on the stool next to him and took a long swig. He looked at the microphone. He looked at his reflection in the glass. He knew he had more in him. But his stats were the bottleneck. His vocals were sitting at B-. Can I try again? Vaughn asked. I think I can push it. Patch raised an eyebrow. He had just heard the kid's range. Physiology didn't change in 5 minutes, but he shrugged. Sure, take 5. Reset. Vaughn turned away from the glass, facing the back wall of the booth. He closed his eyes and spent his hard-earned EXP. Previously, he wasn't sure if he should pump his charm or save it for a rainy day. But standing here, in a real studio, with a real producer, he realized that saving EXP was stupid. The song was the weapon. The weapon needed to be sharp. Vocals. B. EXP. 860. I'm ready, Vaughn finally said, turning back to the mic. Patch looked at him, surprised he was done so quickly. You sure? You didn't even rest. I don't need rest, Vaughn said, his voice sounding richer even in speech. Run the track. Patch shrugged and hit the spacebar. The intro started again. This time, Vaughn first used his emote and resonance to portray the right emotion. He poured the betrayal of the finale, the drive across the country, and the fear of the empty apartment into the mic. You put the weight on my back and I let you. The difference was immediate. He hit the high note in the pre-chorus with a clarity that rang through the booth like a bell. In the control room, Patch stopped looking at the screen. Emily, who had been checking her emails on her phone, also gave him attention. Von Zoom transitioned into the rap verse. He managed to sing the whole piece masterfully than he had done in the previous take. System Pet. Loki. Resonance bar, 3%/100%. Vaughn opened his eyes, breathing hard. The booth felt smaller now, filled with the energy he had just released. How was that? Vaughn asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. For a solid 5 seconds, nobody spoke. Then, Patch pressed the talkback button. What the hell did you just do? I just tried better this time. Emily ignored Vaughn's lies and turned to Patch with a smug, triumphant smile spreading across her face. I told you he's special. The kid adapts. Patch looked back at Vaughn through the glass with newfound respect in his eyes. He is indeed. That was yeah. We're working with this one. I hope this voice isn't a one-time fluke, because you're going to have to match that energy for the ad-libs. Vaughn smiled, the lingering warmth of the upgrade still humming in his chest. I'll be fine. Let's work. For the next 6 hours, the glamour of the music industry evaporated. It was replaced by the grind. Recording a hit song wasn't just singing it once and going home. It was repetitive labor. Patch was a perfectionist, and now that he knew what Vaughn was capable of, he refused to accept anything less than the standard he saw. They stacked vocals, recording the same lines over and over to layer them, creating a chorus effect that sounded huge. They recorded whispers to sit in the background of the mix. They recorded shouts and grunts for texture. Loki slept through most of it, occasionally waking up to critique or demand a snack. But mostly she sat on the top of the acoustic panel, absorbing the ambient frustration and determination in the room. By 4 p.m., Vaughn's voice was raspy and his legs were tired from standing and his head was pounding. All right, Patch announced, swiveling his chair around. That's a wrap. He played back the rough mix. Even without the final mastering, it sounded massive. The layers of vocals created a wall of sound that hit hard. The bones are good, Patch nodded, rubbing his eyes. I'll clean up the frequencies, add the compression, and balance the levels. I should be done with the final master by the end of the week, hopefully. Friday morning at the latest. That's fine by us, Emily said, standing up and stretching. She looked exhausted but happy. Thanks for all your help, Patch. Seriously. Patch laughed dryly. No big deal. I should be thanking you for letting me produce this. Trust me, Emily, this song will be a banger. The industry needs this kind of grit right now. Emily nodded with gleaming eyes. We really hope so. Vaughn grabbed his water bottle, stepping out of the booth. He felt drained, but a good kind of drained. He remembered something and walked close to the massive mixing console, handing his phone to Emily. Hey, can you take a picture? Vaughn asked. I should have done it earlier when I wasn't sweating this way, but this is the reality. Emily took the phone and Vaughn went to sit on the edge of the console, the massive wall of buttons and knobs behind him. He didn't smile. He looked at the camera with tired, intense eyes, one hand adjusting his leather jacket, with Loki perched on his shoulder. Emily took a quick photo and handed the phone back. You going to post it on your photogram? Yeah, Vaughn said, looking at the photo. It was grainy, dark, and looked authentic. I figured I'd try to build some hype before the drop. Smart move, Emily said, gathering her bag. Tease the content, make them wonder where you are. The drive back to Queens was quieter than the morning trip. I'll drop you off, Emily said, merging onto the highway. Go home, rest your voice. Get enough sleep this time. I plan on sleeping for 12 hours, Vaughn replied to the last sentence in particular. Not bad, Emily glanced at him with a laugh. Because the hard part starts soon. Recording is easy. Making people care is the war. I'm going to spend the night contacting some groups so we can go ahead with creating awareness as soon as possible. When the van pulled up to the curb on Ditmars Boulevard, Vaughn thanked her and hopped out. He trudged up the stairs to apartment 2B. When he unlocked the door, he was greeted by a sight that made him groan and smile at the same time. 3 large cardboard boxes sat in the middle of the empty living room. Right, Vaughn muttered. Furniture. He spent the next 2 hours wrestling with a memory foam mattress, shoving it into the bedroom and unrolling it until it puffed up into a usable shape. He assembled the simple black desk in the corner of the living room and sorted all the kitchenware. By 8 p.m., the apartment was still sparse, but it had all G3 needed. Food, Vaughn said aloud. Loki's voice echoed instantly from his wrist. She transformed back into her cat form, landing on the newly assembled desk. Require the fish. I haven't gone grocery shopping yet, Vaughn apologized, pulling out his phone. It's pizza tonight, Loki. Deal with it. You are a terrible provider. Loki sniffed, but she didn't argue. Vaughn ordered 2 large pepperoni pizzas for the 2 of them and sat on the floor while he waited. He opened Photogram. His account, which had been dormant since the finale, was doing pretty well. He had gained 2,000 followers already, and his only post, the apology video, had racked up over 21,000 likes and thousands of comments already. Strike while the iron is hot. Vaughn selected the photo Emily had taken in the studio. The lighting was moody, the mixing board illuminated in the background, and Vaughn looked focused and gritty. He typed the caption, "Back at work, #music #new." Then he posted, Chapter 77, Guerrilla Marketing. Vaughn was not expecting much from the Photogram post he had just made, considering the limited number of followers he currently had. In his mind, the hype around him from the finale was already fading away. Hence, after making the post, he concentrated on completing his daily quests and testing out Loki's ability to consume excess emotions. He had originally feared that this ability was a negative one, that she would somehow take people's genuine feelings away. However, he was reassured to find out it didn't work that way. By excess, the system meant the emotional runoff that had already served its purpose in the atmosphere. Vaughn still didn't fully understand what any of that meant in a practical sense, but with the promise of a level up when the resonance bar filled, he wanted to test it. He had walked across the street, picked up a cheap new acoustic guitar, and played some songs for Loki in the empty apartment. He poured as much feeling as he could into the chords and his voice. Unfortunately, none of it succeeded in getting the bar moving even a fraction of an inch. After an hour of experimenting and brushing up on his instrumental skills, Vaughn set the guitar down and sighed. I guess the emotions aren't excess enough. With that out of the way, he shifted his focus back to his phone. Opening his Photogram app, Vaughn was left absolutely awestruck when he saw the numbers. The post he had uploaded had generated 70,000 likes already, and there were over 1,000 comments underneath it. Vaughn couldn't contain his smile as he opened the comment section to read through them. Alien from Mars. WTFF. Is that a studio? Vaughn is releasing a song. OMG. Need to sleep. Man just lost a final less than 2 weeks ago, and he's back to the grind. Dirty Bob Roundpants. But am I the only one curious? Is he making an entirely new song, or finally recording Masquerade? Mr. Know-It-All. At Dirty Bob Roundpants, it's most likely the second option. Only makes sense he'll build beyond the hype and give us what we deserve. Only normal one. I don't even care what he's making, but it's sure to be a banger if it's coming from Vaughn. Finish up already, bro. Reading the positive messages gave Vaughn a massive surge of adrenaline he didn't even know he needed. He felt genuinely happy seeing the passionate reactions from his supporters, so he decided to reply to some of the comments. To a fan that asked exactly which single he was releasing, he typed, I ain't telling. His playful reply got a lot of attention. In just a few minutes, many others were flocking under the comment Vaughn had left, asking him various questions, including some prying inquiries about his personal life. Vaughn didn't reply to the latter, but he continued answering the rest of the casual messages, even exchanging some jokes and memes with the fans. By the time he finally had to put his phone down and stop, the public had an even better impression of him, and Vaughn felt incredibly positive himself. Now I can't wait for the release myself. As promised, Vaughn slept for a solid 12 hours that night. It would have been 13 hours if Emily's phone calls hadn't woken him up as early as 9 a.m. Hearing his ringtone blaring against the hardwood floor, Vaughn sighed in defeat before he finally picked up. Are you still asleep? Emily's voice demanded through the speaker before he could even say hello. I'll be at your place in 45 minutes. Please get ready already. Emily hung up after not even giving him a chance to counter or defend himself. Vaughn could only sigh in defeat once again before peeling himself off the mattress to head to the bathroom. It only took him 15 minutes to be done with his morning prep and get fully dressed. There were about 30 minutes left before Emily would arrive, and he was standing in the living room considering what to do with that free time when a small furry creature sneaked up on him and blocked his path. Feed me, human. What? You ate last night? Vaughn twitched his eyebrows in annoyance, looking down at the voidlinks. Loki looked away in defiance, lifting her chin. Yes, it's morning now and I'm hungry. You got groceries last night, so no excuses for you. Right on cue, Vaughn's own stomach growled slightly, as if supporting Loki's argument. He thought about it, realizing he had enough ingredients in the kitchen to cook up some good breakfast. He hadn't used his cooking skills in a while either. Vaughn simply sighed and walked toward the kitchen island. Well, you're in luck. I'm hungry too, so I'm a cook now. He pulled out the groceries he had picked up the night before. With his skill passively guiding him, his hands moved with swift, practiced motions. He started with Loki's demand, searing a fresh cut of salmon in a hot pan until the skin was perfectly crisp but the center remained a tender, flaky pink. For himself, and out of courtesy for his dear manager, he cracked several eggs into a bowl, whisking them vigorously. He poured the mixture into a buttered skillet, folding it into rich, fluffy omelets loaded with melting cheese and fresh chives, before sliding them between perfectly toasted, buttered bagels. The rich, savory aroma of toasted bread and sizzling butter quickly filled the usually empty-smelling apartment. Just as he finished wrapping Emily's portion in foil to keep it warm, a sharp knock echoed through the room. Emily let herself in, immediately freezing in the doorway as the smell hit her. "What is that smell?" "I cooked," Vaughn said casually, tossing her the warm, foil-wrapped sandwich. Emily caught it, looking at it with a mix of suspicion and intrigue. She peeled back the foil and took a tentative bite. She wasn't expecting much, but her eyes widened instantly, a look of absolute amazement breaking through her usually stoic, professional demeanor. She chewed, swallowed, and stared at Vaughn. "Vaughn, this is incredible, Tilda," she purred, taking a much larger second bite. "I thought you only knew how to sing. This is better than the deli down my street." "I have hidden depths," Vaughn smirked, leaning against the counter. "If this is how you cook, I'll be coming over to this apartment a lot more often," Emily said, genuinely impressed as she continued to devour the rest of the sandwich. As soon as she walked further inside, Loki immediately trotted over. The Void Lynx eyed the last piece of the wrapped food in Emily's hands, letting out a demanding meow and standing on her hind legs to try and eat her portion. "Oh, no you don't," Emily said, lifting the sandwich out of reach. She wasn't moved by the cat's cuteness any bit this time. After Emily finished her breakfast and wiped her hands, she looked at Vaughn and laid out their agenda for the day. Guerrilla marketing, Emily had called it that morning. It sounded edgy and exciting in the warmth of the apartment. In practice, it was just cold, exhausting, humiliatingly grounded. There was no movie magic moment where the entire city of New York stopped what they were doing to gather around him in awe. It was a Tuesday in late autumn, and New Yorkers had places to be. They started at noon in Washington Square Park. Emily had hauled a heavy, battery-powered Roland Street amplifier out of the trunk of the van, and Vaughn had carried the mic stand. He stood by the fountain and had to perform Masquerade in the cold. A few people recognized him, and some simply admired his songs. They clapped, cheered, and took selfies with him when he finished the set. But after 20 minutes, a park ranger strolled over and threatened Emily with a citation for using unpermitted amplification. They had to pack up and run. From there, it was a grueling montage of the city's underbelly. They dragged the heavy gear down the steps of the Union Square subway station. Vaughn sang over the screeching metal of the N train pulling into the station. He poured his soul into Masquerade for everyone to listen. Commuters threw quarters and crumpled dollar bills into the open guitar case Emily had placed on the ground. It was just an ironic prop, considering he was singing to a backing demo track Patch had bounced to Emily's phone. On the bright side, Loki's resonance bar managed to surge all the way to 5% after the day sessions. By 4 p.m., after a short break, they moved to a street corner in Brooklyn. By 6 p.m., they were outside a busy shopping center in Soho. Emily, for her part, didn't complain at all. While Vaughn sang, she handed out small business cards she had printed that morning. They simply had a QR code on them that linked to a pre-save page for the single. By 8:30 p.m., the temperature had dropped severely and the crowds had thinned out entirely. "All right," Emily finally said. Her bob was slightly windblown. "We're done for the day." Vaughn didn't need to be told twice. He killed the power on the amp and helped her pack the heavy equipment into the Pelican case, his fingers still stiff and numb from the cold. On entering the van, Vaughn melted into the seat and Loki coiled into his arms right away. "I require premium sashimi for this indignity." Vaughn just sighed, letting his head fall back against the headrest. He looked over at Emily, who was already staring at her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. "Was that even worth it?" Define worth it. I mean, what's the use?" Vaughn gestured vaguely toward the window. "I have 15,000 followers on Photogram already. I don't think singing to a few hundred people will help with much." Emily smiled lightly and turned to him. Wheel. It's called digging the trenches. If you build a cult from the streets up, they will follow you to hell and back. Those accepting ones are going to brag that they saw you before the song even dropped, and that's advertisement for us. Vaughn rubbed his eyes, digesting her words. She was right. He had let the reality TV fame warp his expectations. Real music careers were built with struggle. So, what's the timeline? Vaughn asked, petting Loki absent-mindedly. When does the song actually come out? We can't do this every day. We won't have to, Emily said, a small, confident smile returning to her face. I've locked in with the distributor already, and next Friday midnight is the release date. That gives us 9 days to tease the snippet online, do a few more strategic pop-ups, and build the pre-saves. Next Friday, Vaughn repeated, nodding slowly. It felt real now. The finish line was drawn. Emily was about to elaborate on the social media strategy when her phone suddenly started vibrating in her hand. Emily frowned, but answered either ways. As she made the call, Vaughn observed her expression and how it went from relaxed to annoyed with each passing second. After the call was over, she searched something online to confirm her fears, and color drained from her face immediately. Emily, what's wrong? Vaughn couldn't help but ask. He didn't get a reply, as she simply turned her phone around and handed it to Vaughn across the seat. Vaughn took the device. The screen was displaying an exclusive article from Billboard's official website. It had been published less than 10 minutes ago. At the top of the page was a high-resolution, professionally styled photograph of Julian West. He was wearing a designer suit, sitting on a velvet throne, looking every bit the manufactured pop prince he was. But it was the headline beneath the photo that made Vaughn's stomach drop into his shoes. Project: Star winner Julian West announces highly anticipated debut single, set to drop next Friday. Chapter 78. David vs. Goliath. Although the news of Julian's release date came as a massive shock to Vaughn and Emily, it didn't disrupt their flow. Emily simply stared at the glowing screen of her phone for a long, silent minute before she tossed the device onto the dashboard. It was clearly an underhand tactic. Westworld Records had eyes everywhere. Someone at the distribution company had likely leaked their scheduled date to Ryan West. It was a calculated move designed to make sure Vaughn's independent single didn't blow up. They wanted to drown him out. But there was absolutely nothing they could do about that now. The dates were already locked in with their distributor, the pre-save links were live, and backing down would signal defeat. They had no other choice but to proceed at the exact same pace. We don't flinch, Emily said, her voice dropping to a dangerous tone as she started the van's engine. They want to bury us? Fine, we'll make them sweat for it. The next few days were incredibly stressful. If Vaughn thought the first day of busking was hard, the rest of the week was a waking nightmare. He barely had a moment to rest between it all. It felt like Emily was determined to cover the whole of New York City on foot. The anxiety in this metal box is exquisite, Loki would purr in his mind as she lounged on the dashboard. But your exhaustion tastes bitter. Sing louder, human. I can't feel my face, Vaughn mumbled on a Wednesday evening, collapsing onto his mattress after a 5-hour stint in the freezing wind outside Madison Square Garden. Emily, sitting at his desk and aggressively typing emails, didn't even look up. Drink some water and go to sleep. And don't complain, 'cause this is just the start. Vaughn groaned before pulling a pillow over his head. Despite the physical toll, the hype was undeniably building. All eyes in the pop culture sphere were now firmly fixed on the 24th of May. The internet had connected the dots. The two singles releasing on the exact same midnight was a narrative straight out of a Hollywood script, and the world was waiting for the day to come with bated breath. The days went by too quickly, and Friday arrived just like that. Midnight struck, and the songs went live. Merely 3 hours after the midnight release of the two singles, the Sonic Insider, one of the largest and most influential digital music publications in the country, released a massive feature article. The push notification woke up thousands of fans across the country. Minima Tamanstu. This month has not been a quiet one for the music world. From surprise mixtape drops to massive stadium tour announcements, May has kept the charts in a literal chokehold. Most notably, global pop star Jack Sherwin shook up the world at the top of the month by releasing a surprise single titled For You. The rock-driven love ballad debuted with record-breaking streaming numbers. 20 days in, it still remains #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, refusing to budge. Other highly anticipated singles were released over the last 2 weeks, but all could only fade into the background, eclipsed by the massive hype and radio dominance that For You promised. As it seemed that the hype for the month was finally about to die down, and Sherwin would cruise to a historic 4-week reign, the industry received a shock to the system. Just before the month could end, two new, but certainly not unheard of names in the music industry announced their debut singles on the exact same date. What many fans and industry insiders would term as absolutely not a coincidence. Today, Von Varley, the controversial runner-up of Project Star, has finally released the highly anticipated studio version of the track he performed in the finale, Masquerade. It's clear that his former competitor, Julian West, wouldn't be too happy about that. Following their highly strained relationship and the PR nightmare Varley caused for the West family network, Julian hasn't held back either. Julian, who is now the flagship signee West World Records, has made sure his debut track arrived in imperial style. Always Love You is a track with big expectations, and it wears its budget on its sleeve. The soaring, synth-heavy pop anthem was composed by none other than Rayen West himself. Furthermore, among the writing credits, the legendary pop star, Gingerbread Man, left his undeniable mark, ensuring the hook is as catchy as it is mathematically perfect. If the audio wasn't enough, Julian's music video dropped simultaneously at midnight. Directed by a cinematic visionary, the video features Julian in a literal European castle, surrounded by a troupe of 50 professional dancers. According to many critics and leaked production sheets, it's been estimated that almost $1 million was invested in this single track's launch alone. In an earlier interview on The Morning Show, Rayen West spoke of his son's talent. Julian is the voice of this new generation, the billionaire mogul stated. I have full confidence in Always Love You. It's not just a song, it's a statement of excellence. With all of this heavy artillery backing the West World Records camp, Von Varley has a lot to worry about. His independent release of Masquerade, produced by the veteran producer Patch, might not get the attention many would argue it deserves. While Varley has spent the last week going viral for busking in the freezing New York streets, one has to wonder if organic, grassroots street marketing can truly stand up to $1 million corporate machine. Varley has no music video, no radio deals, and no billionaire father buying up Times Square billboards. Many across social media have already termed this midnight drop as the rematch they always wished for but never got on the Project Star stage. It is the ultimate David versus Goliath story of the modern streaming era. Will the polished pop perfection of Always Love You bury the insurgent anger of Masquerade? All eyes are on the real-time charts today. The masks are off, the crown is on the table, and the music industry is watching to see who really won the show. Saturday, May 25, 2019. Von sat in a corner booth of a shop, and curled into a black fur on his lap was Loki, who was playing her role of domestic cat perfectly. You know, Von in a low tone. Julian dropping on the exact same day might actually be doing us a favor. Emily looked up from her laptop, taking a slow sip of her black espresso. How do you figure? The media is eating it up, Von reasoned, scratching Loki behind the ears. Every blog is pushing this billion-dollar corporate machine versus the street busker narrative. They tied our names together. By trying to step on me, he's basically giving me free press. Kind of, Emily conceded with a smirk. But that'll only get you through the front door. That underdog hype won't matter for long if he completely crushes you where it counts. So when do we actually find out the numbers? It's almost been a day already. Emily checked and saw the time before picking up her phone. Well, it's live now. I'm checking the US Top 50 New Releases chart. It tracks the daily streams of all singles dropped within the last 30 days, so it's the most accurate measure of hype. Von leaned forward with anxiety, hearing it was finally available. Even Loki stirred up from his body to see, too. Emily handled her phone for a while before raising her head and looking over at Von. 19. Von, you debuted at rank 19. Von blinked. Out of all the major label songs released this month, an independent track had broken into the top 20. A massive, breathless grin broke across his face. 19. Emily, that's incredible. We actually did it. He waited for her to celebrate, but Emily just stared at the screen. Her lips were pressed into a thin line. What's wrong? Isn't 19 huge for us? What about Julian? Where did his song debut? Emily didn't say a word. She simply reached across the small table and turned her phone screen around. Von looked at the very top of the new releases chart. Sitting at rank 1 was Jack Sherwin's inescapable ballad, For You, and right beneath it was none other than his rival, the Golden Prince himself. Rank 2, Julian West, Always Love You. Chapter 79. Debut single. The reality of the corporate machine staring back at them from the phone screen was a bitter pill to swallow. But surprisingly, the hurdle didn't completely derail their momentum. Emily quickly took control of the situation, refusing to let the ranking dampen their spirits. She laid out the harsh reality of the industry, pointing out that Julian had simply bought his way to the top tier with sponsored ads and label money. In contrast, every single stream Vaughn had earned came from a real, dedicated listener who had actively searched for his name. Debuting at rank 19 without a single billboard or radio push was not a defeat, but rather a massive victory. She firmly assured him that this was only the beginning, and that the numbers would surely improve once the weekend crowd got a hold of the track. Her confidence became the exact anchor Vaughn needed. Trusting her experience, he went to sleep that night convinced that word of mouth would inevitably propel him upwards by Saturday. But the music industry was rarely a fairy tale. The next day, Vaughn eagerly expected the ranking to improve. Instead, when Emily checked the daily update, Julian remained comfortably glued to the number 2 spot, while Vaughn had fallen 2 places to rank 21. It's just the weekend dip, Emily had rationalized. Casual listeners, but the trend didn't break. It remained like that for the next few days. By Wednesday, Vaughn had slowly bled down to rank 25. Julian, despite the backing, only lost a single place, settling at rank 3 behind Jack Sherwin and a formerly released rap anthem. It was a descent that made Vaughn question every decision he had made since leaving the Star Mansion. He was sitting on the floor of his apartment, mindlessly tossing a tennis ball against the wall, when his phone rang. It was Emily. "We got a spot," she announced immediately, skipping any pleasantries. "The acoustic sessions on the global digital broadcast. It's a huge platform for breaking artists." Vaughn paused, catching the tennis ball. His eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Wait, seriously? How did you manage that? I thought we were getting locked out of the major media circuits." "I had to pull a lot of strings and call in some favors from my old Uptown days," Emily said proudly, the smirk evident in her voice. "But honestly, the producers wanted you. Your song is really well accepted online, Vaughn. You have your core fans to thank for how much they love it. They've been spamming the show's comment sections demanding you perform. Soon enough, with appearances like this, you'll start doing much better with the streams." The news was a much-needed shot of adrenaline. The rest of the week became an absolute blur. It was packed from dawn until dusk. Vaughn barely had a moment to breathe as he bounced between impromptu street performances, late-night vocal rehearsals for the upcoming acoustic show, and endless social media updates. The physical and mental strain was immense, a far cry from the pampered, scheduled life of a reality TV contestant. Miles away from the gritty streets of Queens, in a dimly lit bedroom illuminated only by the glow of dual monitors, a girl named Maya sat staring blankly at her editing timeline. It was 2 a.m. Empty cans of energy drinks littered her desk. Maya was a freelance video editor, and she was currently battling a severe case of editor's block. She was working on a personal passion project, a cinematic villain arc edit featuring clips from her favorite dark fantasy anime. She had the visuals cut perfectly. The color grading was flawless. The transitions were smooth, but it was missing its soul. She had spent the last 2 hours scrolling through her music library, trying out heavy metal tracks, generic trap beats, and overly dramatic orchestral scores. None of them fit. They were all either too messy or lacked the specific emotional punch she needed for the climax of the video. "Come on," Maya groaned, rubbing her burning eyes. "Give me something with some actual grit." She clicked over to a generic new indie releases playlist on the platform, preparing to be disappointed yet again. She blindly clicked a track with a dark, simple cover art of a clown with 2 faces. The title read, "Masquerade." Maya put on her heavy, noise-canceling headphones and hit play. She expected generic strumming or a flat beat. Instead, she was met with a haunting, slow vocal intro that immediately sent shivers down her arms. But when the beat dropped and the rap began, Maya felt like she had literally ascended. "Wow," she breathed out, her eyes widening in the dark room. The beat was perfectly synchronized with a heavy heartbeat. "What is this? How haven't I heard this before?" She quickly looked up the singer's profile. Vaughn Varley. She recognized the name vaguely from some reality TV drama her friends had been talking about, but she didn't care about the politics. She only cared about the sound. It was the missing puzzle piece. She dragged the audio file into her Premiere Pro timeline. The heavy snares and the aggressive, venomous rap verses perfectly matched the sword strikes and dramatic character shifts in her video. She spent the next 3 hours in an absolute trance, meticulously syncing her visual transitions to the heavy thumps of the track. By 5:30 a.m., she exported the final file. She uploaded it to TikTok, tagged the sound, and titled it, "The Masks Are Off, #Villain Arc." Exhausted, she collapsed into bed and fell asleep instantly. When Maya woke up at 1 p.m. the same day, her phone was burning hot to the touch on her nightstand. The screen was an endless blur of push notifications. Blinking the sleep out of her eyes, she opened the TikTok app. She almost dropped the phone on her face. The edit she had posted had 900,000 likes. What the Maya sat up, her jaw completely unhinged. Her most popular video prior to this had barely scraped 900 likes. This single video had amassed nearly 1 million in a matter of hours, and the view count was skyrocketing past 4 million. She opened the comments section, her hands trembling slightly. Sizzling Bacon 99. Fire edit. Bro, the transitions are so clean. What's that song? Why haven't I heard it before? Anime God _XX. This audio is literally ascending me. I'm definitely using this sound for my next video. Sarah Smiles _not. Wow, can I duet your video? The beat drop is insane. Tea Time Drama Queen. Wait, why haven't I heard this song? Who is the artist? Ginger Brad. OMG guys. I know this song from Project Star. It's Von Varley's finale song, so they later released the studio version. I'm adding it to my playlist ASAP. Maya rapidly replied to a few comments, pointing them toward Von's streaming profiles, but she was mostly just staring in absolute shock at how the video had performed. The combination of her sleek visuals and the aggressive, addictive nature of the song had created the perfect algorithmic storm. Seeing the massive engagement, she immediately decided to make 3 more videos utilizing different sections of the song. She wasn't the only one. The audio from her video was reused by thousands of other creators within the hour. Makeup artists used the beat drop to transition into dark, dramatic looks. Gym influencers used the heavy bass to soundtrack their deadlifts. Teenagers used the lyrics to vent about toxic friendships. Slowly, almost invisibly at first, TikTok was being entirely overtaken by a song from an indie artist. Thousands of videos were multiplying into tens of thousands. Vaughn pushed his way through the heavy double doors of a lavish banquet hall in Long Island. He was wearing a slightly stiff, rented black suit, and he looked thoroughly miserable. He had just finished a 45-minute set. He had poured his heart into his vocals, navigating the complex runs of his original songs, only to be met with polite, scattered applause from a crowd of wedding guests who were vastly more interested in the open bar and the chocolate fountain than the live entertainment. He aggressively loosened his tie as he walked out into the cool night air, making a beeline for the familiar black van parked by the curb. He yanked the passenger door open and threw himself into the seat, letting out a long, frustrated groan. Emily looked up from her tablet, unfazed by his dramatic entrance. How was the food today? Don't, Vaughn snapped, rubbing his temples. He was visibly upset and completely drained. When you said you were booking shows, I expected the Roxy. I expected the Bowery Ballroom. Hell, I expected dive bars in Brooklyn. Since that first acoustic sessions taping, I've only been performing at weddings and Sweet 16 parties. Emily sighed, setting her tablet down. She saw his annoyance, and truthfully, she understood it. The frustration didn't just stem from the unglamorous gigs, it came from the suffocating reality of the charts. Despite the initial hype and the hardcore fans, Masquerade was barely moving on the official rankings. As of yesterday's update, the song only had 800,000 total streams across all platforms. Even worse, the slow bleed had continued. After dropping to rank 25, the song had continued to fall, officially leaving the Hot 50 chart entirely by the end of its first week. While 800K streams was not a bad number for a completely unknown indie artist, it was a massive disappointment for a song that had come with so many expectations and national television exposure. It stung even more when Emily had checked the industry reports that morning. Julian's Always Love You had already crossed 9 million streams, comfortably sitting in the top 5. Well, Emily started, her usual confidence replaced by a rare moment of pragmatic hesitation. Honestly, Vaughn, I don't know what to do myself. The indie route is brutal. We're fighting an ocean with a bucket. We might as well make some actual money from all these private gigs. If we can't help the song climb the charts, we can at least profit from your short-term popularity to keep a roof over our heads. Vaughn relapsed deeper into the leather seat, staring out the window at the streetlights. He let out a long, heavy sigh of disappointment. It wasn't the fairy tale ending he had expected. He had thought talent and grit would be enough to instantly conquer the machine. He had thought wrong. What rank is it now? Vaughn asked with a hollow voice. He didn't even want to know. but a morbid curiosity forced the question out of his throat. Emily picked up her phone. She was about to open her mouth and gently remind him that he had left the Hot 50 yesterday, so there was no point in checking the chart. But out of habit, she opened the Musify app anyway, navigating to the daily update page that had just refreshed. But as he looked at the screen, the words died in her throat. Her eyes went wide, reflecting the bright glow of the application. The color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her looking as if she had just seen a ghost. "Emily?" Vaughn asked, noticing her sudden frozen silence. "What is it?" "Oh, I remember it's fallen off from the rankings already." Emily slowly turned her head to look at him, shoving the phone at his face. "You're Vaughn, you're number 10. Chapter 80. Fast Success. Number 10? Vaughn repeated and grabbed the phone from Emily's hands, his eyes darting across the brightly lit screen. There it was, rocketing upwards with a green arrow next to its title. Masquerade was officially sitting at number 10 on the Musify New Releases Daily Top 50. "I don't understand," Vaughn stammered, his exhaustion entirely forgotten. "Yesterday it was at 800,000 streams. How does it jump to number 10 overnight?" Emily snatched her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen as she opened her back-end analytics dashboard. What she saw made her gasp out loud. "It's not just Musify," Emily said, her voice rising in pitch. "It's everywhere. Look at this." Vaughn had a look, and he had gained 600K streams in the past 24 hours across all platforms. But how? Emily couldn't answer him herself, but she was busy with her phone for a while, searching. After a few tense minutes for Vaughn who hoping it wasn't a glitch, she looked up with a wide smile. "It's TikTok." Someone made an edit using song, it got viral, and now thousands of others have discovered your masterpiece. Masquerade is trending. Vaughn immediately understood. This wasn't the first time TikTok played a major role in promoting a song. He had seen a fair share of such occurrences in his past life, and he was truly grateful to be at the center this time. Now it was all down to how long it was gonna last. Indeed, the hype hadn't been temporary, as the next 3 weeks were a chaotic, euphoric blur. As May bled into the heat of a June, Masquerade stopped being just a song on a chart. It became an inescapable cultural phenomenon. Walking down the streets of Queens, Vaughn could hear Patch's heavy, thumping bass line rattling the windows of passing cars. Bodega owners had it playing on their radios. Teenagers on the subway were loudly quoting the rap verses to each other. It wasn't just a track anymore. It was an anthem for anyone who felt overlooked, underestimated, or used. The immediate impact of the success was staggering. Emily's phone, which had previously only received automated rejection emails from industry gatekeepers and radio promoters, began ringing so incessantly. Major radio stations that had completely ignored their independent release email a month prior were now practically begging to play the track. They didn't have a choice. They were being forced to adapt by the sheer volume of aggressive fan requests clogging their phone lines and spamming their social media accounts. The digital landscape shifted just as violently. Features and collaborations started rolling in like a wave for Vaughn. Prominent indie artists, verified producers, and even a few mainstream rappers slid directly into Vaughn's direct messages. They were addressing him as a peer, sending fire emojis and asking if he was open to doing remixes or hopping on their upcoming albums. Vaughn would stare at his screen late at night in sheer disbelief, watching big accounts beg for a fraction of his current momentum. But the most satisfying change for Vaughn wasn't the digital numbers or the radio play. It was the gigs. Exactly a week after that miserable wedding disaster in Long Island, Vaughn stepped out of the black van into the sticky evening air. But this time, he wasn't carrying his own heavy amplifier, and he wasn't standing in a sterile banquet hall. He was standing in the back alley behind the iconic Bowery Ballroom in Manhattan. Out front, a line of screaming fans wrapped entirely around the city block, held back by metal barricades and security. The venue held 600 people. Emily had booked it as a tentative test of his real-world pull. It had sold out in exactly 4 minutes. When Vaughn walked onto the stage that night, he's had one of the best experiences of his lives, as hundreds of others sang back every single word with him. That was one of many of such nights Vaughn got to experience with a new momentum. All of a sudden, it felt like he was speedrunning the game now. While Vaughn was experiencing the euphoric ascent of independent stardom, the atmosphere inside a $20 million mansion in the Hollywood Hills was noticeably toxic. Julian West sat on a custom-made Italian leather sofa, staring blankly at the wall. He had just finished a scripted, hour-long interview with a premier pop culture magazine. He had smiled, laughed at the journalists' terrible jokes, and played the perfect humble pop prince. But now, he had a scowl on his face. Valerie, his senior manager assigned directly by Westworld Records, stood awkwardly near the marble fireplace. She was a seasoned industry veteran, but right now she looked like she would rather be anywhere else in the world. She held a silver tablet against her chest like a shield. "Give me the final numbers for the month," Julian demanded, reaching out to pour a glass of sparkling water from a crystal decanter. Valerie cleared her throat. "Julian, we need to look at the overall picture. The debut was really strong. We dominated the opening week. I asked for the numbers." She sighed after being interrupted, looking down at the screen. A month after release, Always Love You is sitting at 9 million streams across all major platforms. 9 million. To any normal artist, it was a staggering, life-changing number. But Julian wasn't meant to be a normal artist. 9 million, he repeated. "We hit 8 million streams within the first 10 days. Are you telling me that in the last 20 days, we've only gained 1 million streams?" Valerie didn't meet his eyes. The momentum stalled. The initial marketing push brought in the casual listeners, but the replay value hasn't sustained itself. People are losing interest in the track. The radio spins are keeping it afloat, but the engagement has dropped significantly. Julian felt a pain in his chest. It was like being told his song wasn't good. And the end-of-month charts, the new release board? Valerie hesitated. This was the part she had been dreading all morning. "We ended the month at number 7 on the new release chart. And Varley?" he questioned again. "He finished 4 places above you. He secured the number 3 spot." Only silence was left in the room. It was a total, unmitigated disaster. The Westworld Records machine had spent nearly $1 million on this single, only to be outstreamed by a street busker without a label. Damn it. Julian hurled the glass across the room, and it shattered against the marble fireplace, sending shards of expensive glass and water raining across the Persian rug. Valerie took a step back. "It's him!" Julian roared, his polished demeanor completely shattering. He grabbed handfuls of his perfectly styled blonde hair, pulling at it in sheer frustration. "It's all because of him. He humiliated me on live television, and now he's humiliating me on the charts. We spent so much on this launch. How is he beating me?" He kicked a small side table, sending a stack of magazines flying. He looked around the room, hunting for something else to break. "Julian, please, calm down." Valerie stepped forward, raising her hands placatingly. "Throwing a tantrum isn't going to fix the metrics. It's nothing you can control. You have to understand, Masquerade didn't beat you because it's a better song. It became popular because of a stupid trend on TikTok. He just got lucky." Julian stopped pacing and glared at her. Valerie was still talking. "These internet trends burn bright, but they die fast. Hopefully the trend dies out by next week, and his streams will plummet. But we can't focus on him. We have to focus on our own campaign." Julian scoffed. "What campaign? The song is dead in the water." "No, it's not," Valerie countered. "On the bright side, the PR team just pulled a miracle. We got you a primetime guest spot on Late Night with Colin this Friday." Julian paused. Late Night with Colin wasn't just another podcast. It was the premier late-night television show in the country. Broadcasting to over 7 million live viewers, the show had the power to dictate national pop culture narratives. The host, Colin Gork, was known for viral interview segments that often trended worldwide the next morning. "Colin Gork?" Julian muttered, his frustration cooling slightly. He wasn't entirely interested at first. An interview wouldn't magically fix his streaming numbers. But then, as he stared at the shattered glass on the floor, a thought slowly materialized in his mind. If Vaughn's entire success was built on a fragile, unpredictable internet trend, then that trend was his greatest vulnerability. Julian's lips slowly curled into a cold, calculating smile. "Valerie," Julian said, his voice returning to its smooth cadence. "This might just be exactly what I wanted. Call the PR team. I know exactly what we're going to talk about on Friday." Chapter 81. Julian's Interview. Late Night with Colin Gork was not just a television show, it was an American cultural institution. Broadcasting from the heart of Rockefeller Center, the show boasted over 5 million live viewers and tens of millions of digital clips circulated the next morning. It was the absolute pinnacle of late-night television. It didn't matter how rich you were, who your father was, or how many billions of dollars your company was worth. You could not simply buy a seat on Colin Gork's plush velvet guest couch. The producers of Late Night cared about one thing and one thing only: cultural heat. They only booked the guests who were dominating the current zeitgeist. There was a waiting list months long, filled with A-list Hollywood actors, platinum-selling musicians, and viral internet sensations desperate for a 7-minute slot. Therefore, it was a massive, undeniable flex that Julian West had been called. Of course, the pristine spontaneity of the show was an intricate illusion. Behind the scenes, the late-night circuit was a heavily manufactured machine. Days before Julian even stepped foot in the studio, Valerie and the Westworld Records PR team had conducted a rigorous pre-interview with the show's segment producers. They had meticulously outlined the topics, agreed on the jokes Julian would make, and structured the exact questions Colin Gork would ask. Nothing was left to chance. To add to the prestige, Julian wasn't just booked for a quick chat. He was scheduled as both the lead guest and the musical guest. He would sit on the couch for the primary interview block and then return at the end of the broadcast to perform Always Love You live for the nation. When the heavy studio doors finally opened and the live house band played his intro music, Julian walked out onto the stage looking like absolute perfection. Dressed in a tailored, slim-fit burgundy suit, he flashed his brilliant $1 million smile. The live audience, prompted by glowing applause signs suspended above the cameras, erupted into deafening cheers. Julian waved graciously, shook Colin's hand, and sank into the guest couch, crossing his legs with practiced elegance. This was his true element. This was his opportunity to give the masses another perspective of him as a person, to wash away the stains of the Project Star finale and rebrand himself as the humble, hard-working pop prince. Julian West, ladies and gentlemen. Colin Gork beamed from behind his mahogany desk, adjusting his tie. Welcome to the show. It has been an absolute whirlwind of a month for you. First of all, congratulations. How does it feel winning Project Star and now officially dropping your debut single? Julian smiled warmly, his eyes crinkling just the right amount. Thank you, Colin. Honestly, it feels surreal. The show was an incredible boot camp, but to finally have my own music out in the world, it's a dream come true. Well, speaking of the music, Colin leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. It's hard to ignore the timing. You dropped your debut single on the exact same night, at the exact same time, as your former Project Star castmate, Vaughn Varley. What a coincidence. Do you still consider him a rival? The audience let out a collective, soft ooh and leaned in for the drama. Julian chuckled, shaking his head with a perfectly engineered look of fondness. Well, Colin, first and foremost, he's a friend. A ripple of laughter echoed through the studio audience at the sheer absurdity of the statement, given the explosive reality TV finale. Julian laughed along with them, holding up a hand. Okay, maybe he doesn't see me that way right now. But seriously, we went through a lot together on that show. I can't forget that I've had his back, and he's had mine many times in that mansion. I don't think that's something I regret. A very mature perspective, Colin noted. But releasing on the same day? Was that planned? As for releasing on the same day, I'll say it's destiny, Julian smiled, looking directly into the camera. Maybe that's just how it was written for it to be. Colin smiled broadly. Oh, Julian, truly a kind soul. But let's talk about the music itself. Let's talk about Always Love You. What was the inspiration behind the track? It stands for all forms of love, Colin. Not just romantic love, Julian explained, his voice turning soft and earnest. It's a message that regardless of the distance or the disagreements, I won't separate from those who truly care about me. It's about loyalty. Beautiful, Colin said. Now, I have to ask, the internet has been dissecting Vaughn Varley's song, Masquerade. The way he sang it in the finale, a lot of people thought he was painting your dirty laundry out in public. Is that true? Is the song a dig at you? The studio went pin-drop quiet. This was the question everyone wanted to know. Julian kept his posture relaxed, though his eyes sharpened slightly. I disagree. Even though it might look like it, you didn't hear my name in his lyrics, did you? Colin shook his head. No, no names were dropped. Exactly, Julian said smoothly. If it was targeting me, there would be a defamation case, because most of Vaughn's lyrics lack any real evidence. I'll say what I've said so many times before. Vaughn had something else in mind while writing his song, and it's frankly none of my business to figure that out. Colin let out a small laugh, easing the sudden tension. Well said. Dodged like a true politician, haha. But Julian, have you seen the internet recently? Masquerade has 15 million streams across all platforms already. It's being called the Song of the Summer. Many believe there's a war between you and Vaughn on the charts, and Varley is running away with the win. Julian let out a light, breathy laugh, perfectly masking the sheer rage boiling beneath him. He executed the PR spin exactly as him and Valerie had drafted it. Yes, it's all over TikTok, Julian nodded, adopting a slightly condescending, older brother tone. But I'll tell you something, Colin, as a fellow artist, TikTok trends are great for a quick viral moment. It's fun. But for me, real artistry is about world building. The audience listened intently. That's why my label and I invested a lot of effort into the Always Love You music video. Julian continued, gesturing with his hands to emphasize his passion. We wanted to give the fans a true cinematic experience, a visual masterpiece, not just a 15-second phone clip. He looked back at Colin, delivering the kill shot. I think the difference between a fleeting internet trend and a true lasting artist is the ability to deliver high-tier visual art. Colin leaned back, steepling his fingers. Well, indeed, Masquerade doesn't have a music video. But in the streaming era, does that really matter? Yes, actually it does, Julian said, his tone raising just a fraction, injecting a hint of genuine steel into his voice. For a song of the summer, it has to be big. It has to have scope. I don't think Masquerade can leave a lasting impact without it. Always Love You is a different type of song. It's not one of these mass-produced, effortless internet projects. Colin raised an eyebrow slightly at Julian's sharpened tone. Julian was making his stance clear for all to see. The internet already knew from the Star Mansion edits how hardworking Julian portrayed himself to be, often juxtaposed against Vaughn, who was frequently painted by the network as someone who got away with sheer luck and some talent. Julian was leaning heavily into that established narrative. Ah, I see, Colin nodded slowly, steering the ship toward the harbor. Well, what's the way forward now? What's next for Julian West? Julian's charming smile instantly returned. Around December, I'll be dropping my debut album. It features songs I began writing years ago. I put a lot of work into it, and I really hope the fans will love it. I'm certainly looking forward to it, Julian, Colin beamed to the camera. Thank you for being here with us. Do you have anything you want to say to the fans before we go to break? Julian looked directly into the main lens, flashing his teeth. I just want to say I love you all. Go listen to Always Love You. The video is on InkTube. Bye. The audience erupted into applause as the house band kicked in. After the curtains virtually closed on the segment, Colin stepped out from behind his desk to address the cameras one last time. Don't go anywhere, folks. The song will be performed by Julian as our final segment tonight, so stay tuned. But for now, we'll be welcoming our next guest. Hours later, after the live broadcast wrapped, the Westworld Records machine went to work. By the next morning, articles and media blogs began flooding the internet with Julian's carefully constructed remarks. WWR's Westworld Records' massive PR department gave the narrative a heavy, expensive push, ensuring the quotes were placed on the front pages of every major pop culture site. It was quickly trending across all platforms. The strategy was flawless. The conversation was forcefully shifted away from Vaughn's audio success and directly onto his lack of visuals. One popular music news outlet released a featured editorial that hit the internet like a bomb. It had already accumulated 120,000 reads in just a single hour. Varley just a TikTok one-hit wonder? Why Masquerade lacks visual impact. Chapter 82. Online backing. Ultimately, music in the modern era is a multi-sensory experience. Julian West has proven that he understands the assignment. Until Varley can produce visuals that match the aggression of his audio, he remains nothing more than a passing internet fad. What the fuck is even this view? Vaughn couldn't help but question the sheer absurdity of the article he was reading, tossing his phone onto the bed. It was one of their rare free days, a brief pause in the relentless cycle of gigging and traveling, but there was no peace to be found. Newspapers, blogs, and major media outlets had broadcasted Julian's late-night claim everywhere, treating it as if it was a meaningful, intellectual challenge to the industry. To Vaughn, it was clear as day that Masquerade was by far the better song. Julian was just losing the audio war and desperately trying to switch the goalposts to visuals. Emily swiveled her ergonomic chair to face Vaughn. It was a new addition to the apartment, alongside a sleek coffee maker, a proper dining table, and a few other useful appliances and furniture. They had racked up some good cash already from the recent surge in bookings, and Emily had firmly insisted that Vaughn couldn't continue living like a squatter in an empty brick box. Well, the media don't give a fuck, Emily said flatly, crossing her arms. They can take any bullshit and spin it however they want. The West team is more than capable of buying the narrative. They spoon-fed Colin Gork that setup, and the press ate it up for breakfast. Vaughn flopped backward onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling. So what now? Do we have to create a music video? Well, I wish it was that simple, Vaughn, Emily sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. But we're still broke. Maybe slightly better off than before, but in industry terms we have nothing. Your streams haven't begun giving payouts yet, so for now, all we have is the liquid cash from the shows and gigs, and all that money won't really do for a music video that'll challenge Julian's. Oh, Vaughn muttered, thinking about her words. He had made an extra $20,000 in these past few weeks alone. It was more money than he had ever made firsthand. Although he had already sent out most of that money to Naomi and Zach, he still had a decent sum left. But listening to Emily, it was a harsh reality check. To imagine that he was making what felt like a fortune, yet was still considered at the absolute bottom of the industry food chain, was sobering. So we just give up? Vaughn asked. Sadly, yes. At least on the visual front, Emily admitted, leaning back in her chair. A music video would do us great right now, but we literally cannot afford it. The basic lyric video we launched on InkTube only racked up 40,000 views. That's what we have, and we can't magically summon a film crew. She paused for a while. But honestly, I'd be more worried about our dominance instead. What do you mean? In the past 24 hours, we're still number 91 on the Musified Daily Hot 200, Emily read from her tablet, swiping through the analytics. But we just experienced a 4% reduction in daily streams. On the other hand, Julian charted as rank 197 just from mentioning your name on television. Vaughn had his mouth wide open. He was being used as a stepping stone. That was never supposed to be the case with him. He was the one who had crushed Julian in the revenge narrative. His mind began to flood with intrusive thoughts. Were Julian's words actually true? Would the general public forget about Masquerade the very moment TikTok moved on to the next viral dance or audio clip? He didn't want that to happen. He didn't want to be a flash in the pan. Emily seemed to sense his spiraling woes. Yeah, you should be worried, she added in a sympathetic but pragmatic voice. I haven't checked the social scape as of recent, but this is the exact type of manufactured controversy that serves as the perfect opportunity for your fans to turn against you. I'll be hoping against that too. Emily's concerns triggered a deep knot of anxiety in Vaughn's chest. Needing some sort of concrete grounding, he mentally summoned his interface to check his panel. Fan count, 73,850. From the previous day when he had last checked, the number hadn't decreased. On the contrary, it remained on a steady, upward growing curve. It seemed all was positive for now. Unbeknownst to them, the internet was currently going through a massive stir. Meters away in her own apartment, Sasha, the energetic neighbor who had bumped into Vaughn a few weeks prior, sat cross-legged on her bed, furiously typing on her keyboard. Ever since that fateful day when she managed to snag a selfie with Vaughn in the hallway, she had used it to their leverage. As promised, she had carefully cropped the background to ensure she didn't reveal his location or compromise his privacy. But that didn't stop her from utilizing the photo as irrefutable proof of her credentials. With it, she had founded a dedicated fan club on Subverse, a massive, forum-based social media platform that functioned as the front page of the internet. The community, officially named s/The Uncrowned, had exploded in popularity. What started as a small gathering of hardcore Project Star viewers had quickly swelled, and the community of V-Stans already boasted 8K highly active members. Sasha naturally remained the undisputed leader and head moderator. As the internet underwent a storm following Julian's condescending late-night interview, Sasha's forum was ground zero for the counterattack. She had pinned the popular, infuriating article to the top of the community board and left a scathing comment to rally the troops. The president. They've come again. Julian and his daddy's PR team are working overtime to bury our boy. Read this garbage. The comments section beneath her post was a rapid-fire war zone of indignance and loyalty. Imma_rage_quit. This is absolute bullshit. How dumb does the internet have to be to buy this corporate spin? Julian's acting like renting a castle makes his generic pop song a masterpiece. Kiss my axe. Exactly. Didn't Fawn live in a tiny apartment? How do they expect an indie artist without a label to make $1 million music video out of thin air? The playing field isn't level. Suck_my_popsicle. Julian is such a spoiled brat, lol. He's just mad his track is plummeting on the charts while Masquerade is literally everywhere. He can't buy hype, so he's crying about visuals. Ima Rio. Okay, raging is fun and all, but what's the plan? We can't just let Westworld Records control the narrative and label Vaughn a TikTok fad. The president. So I was thinking, why don't we get him a music video? I need 2p. How exactly would that be done? Even if we set up a come fund me right now, it won't suffice. Good cameras, editing, sets. It costs tens of thousands of dollars minimum. The president. No, a come fund me won't work. It's too slow. But we all know how good Masquerade is. Don't you think a big corporation can help him get the video he deserves? It's happened many times in the past. Brands sponsor indie artists who have massive hype. Hot name here, smart idea TBH, but how will it work in practice? We don't have industry contacts. The president. Simple. We'll spam every big corporation out there to show their support. Energy drinks, clothing brands, streaming platforms, everyone. Surely when they see our dedication and what we can pull, someone will realize it's the marketing opportunity of the year. Something can happen. Lowercase guy. I'm loving the idea of this. Julian's gonna get his ass kicked for the third time. Moo ha ha. The V-stands weren't joking. From that very day, they formed a highly coordinated digital movement. The hashtag #GiveVonABudget launched from the Subverse forums and immediately trended across America and beyond. The V-stands were just too loyal to Vaughn, to the point it was genuinely scary. They operated like a digital army, swarming the social media accounts of major youth brands and media conglomerates. As the hashtag climbed the trending pages, surely other loyal fans who didn't even know about the Subverse community joined in. TikTok editors began watermarking their viral videos with the tag. Thousands of users flooded Julian's Instagram comments with #GiveVonABudget, drowning out his promotional material. It was an absolute online takeover. The sheer volume of the outcry was so overwhelming that even Julian began to panic, his carefully constructed PR narrative backfiring and mutating into a massive spotlight on Vaughn's underdog status. The internet loves a rebel, and Julian had inadvertently painted Vaughn as the ultimate rebel fighting against a billion-dollar empire. The online movement lasted for almost a week. They achieved incredible metrics and even coverage from secondary pop culture blogs marveling at the sheer force of Vaughn's fandom. But even then, the corporate world moved slowly. Despite the deafening noise, there wasn't any official news coming in. Vaughn himself was silently observing everything from the confines of his apartment. He spent hours scrolling through the hashtag, completely blown away by how much his fans were willing to go to support him. They were fighting a war on his behalf, spending their free time organizing campaigns just to see him win. The profound dedication shifted something deep inside him. He no longer just wanted to succeed for himself or to spite Julian. He wanted to succeed to validate their belief in him. He wanted to give them the victory they were fighting so desperately for. However, as time rolled around, the hashtag began to naturally slip down the trending charts. The internet's notoriously short attention span was beginning to wane, and it seemed like there would be no silver lining to the week-long crusade. That was, until Emily got a certain call from an unknown number on an otherwise average Monday morning. Chapter 83. Vanguard Apparel. Vanguard Apparel was not just a clothing company, it was a carefully curated lifestyle. Founded in the late 1990s as a gritty, underground skate brand in Los Angeles, it had spent the last 2 decades evolving into a global streetwear powerhouse. However, recently, Vanguard had experienced a slight identity crisis. After a corporate buyout by a massive conglomerate 2 years prior, the brand had slowly started to lose its edge. They had sponsored too many safe, manufactured pop stars and generic internet influencers. The original, rebellious spirit that made Vanguard so coveted had been diluted. Realizing this fatal error, the new CEO had completely cleaned house, bringing in a fresh, aggressive marketing team with one strict mandate: find the true counterculture and reclaim the streets. The Vanguard marketing team had been exhaustively observing the social landscape for a while, desperately searching for the most promising, authentic talent to carry the weight of their upcoming fall/winter collection. They needed someone who embodied raw ambition, someone who wasn't polished by a corporate machine. That was when the #GiveVonABudget movement exploded across their social listening dashboards. The sheer ferocity of the V-stands caught their attention, but it was Von Varley himself who kept it. They dug into his history, the rigged reality TV show, the independent release from Queens, the organic TikTok explosion, and finally, Julian West's condescending late-night interview. It was a marketer's absolute dream. Julian West represented the manufactured corporate machine Vanguard was trying to distance itself from. Von Varley represented the exact insurgent, underdog demographic they needed to capture. The marketing director had compiled a dossier on Vaughn, listing him as a priority candidate, and slammed it down on the CEO's desk on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, the decision was unanimous. Vanguard wasn't just going to sponsor Vaughn. They were going to fund his entire war effort. "This is Emily Brooklyn, managing Von Varley," Emily answered, her tone instantly shifting into a cool, impenetrable wall of professionalism as she picked up the unknown Los Angeles number. "Emily, good morning. My name is Marcus. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Vanguard Apparel." A deep voice echoed through the speaker. Vaughn, sitting on the edge of his mattress, felt his breath hitch hearing the call. Vanguard was iconic. They were the exact opposite of Julian West's polished country club aesthetic. "Good morning, Marcus," Emily said smoothly, not betraying an ounce of surprise. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I'll cut right to the chase, Emily. We've been watching the charts, and more importantly, we're watching the social media metrics this morning," Marcus said. "Julian West's PR team just handed you the greatest marketing alley-oop of the decade, and Vanguard wants to be the ones to help you dunk it. We want to fund the Masquerade music video." Emily smirked at Vaughn. "We are certainly exploring our options regarding visuals. The fan demand is unprecedented. We are prepared to wire a production budget of $250,000 to your designated production company by the end of the business day," Marcus stated matter-of-factly. "Vaughn retains 100% creative control. Our only stipulations are a presented by Vanguard title card, and Vaughn wears pieces from our unreleased fall/winter nightshade collection in the primary shots. That's it." Emily looked at Vaughn, raising an eyebrow in a silent question. Vaughn didn't hesitate. He nodded his head quickly like a kid. "Send over the paperwork, Marcus," Emily said, a triumphant edge finally bleeding into her professional tone. "We have a deal." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of legal documents, non-disclosure agreements, and rapid-fire logistics. Once the contracts were officially signed and the massive $250,000 wire transfer cleared into their newly established LLC account, Vanguard didn't waste any time. Before they even locked in a music video director, Vanguard demanded a preliminary promotional photo shoot to officially announce the partnership. Vaughn was flown out to a massive industrial warehouse studio in Brooklyn the very next morning. The space was filled with blinding strobe lights, massive canvas backdrops, and a crew of 20 frantic stylists, makeup artists, and photographers. For 6 hours, Vaughn was dressed, undressed, and pinned into various pieces of the highly classified Nightshade collection. He modeled heavy, distressed denim jackets covered in dark, metallic hardware. He wore oversized, vintage-washed graphic tees, thick combat boots, and layered silver chains that rattled when he moved. The stylist continually sprayed his hair to give it a messy, effortlessly gritty texture, instructing him to look aggressively into the camera lens. During a brief 10-minute water break, Vaughn slumped into a canvas director's chair, exhausted. Emily, who had been observing the shoot from behind the glass, walked over and handed him a bottle of water. She tilted her head, studying his face intently under the harsh studio lighting. "Is it just me, or do you look better than usual?" Emily asked, her brow furrowing slightly. Vaughn took a long drink of water, offering a casual shrug and a sharp wink. "I guess the clothes just really look good on me, Em." "No," Emily muttered, squinting at his jawline. "Even before we got here, your skin is clearer, your jawline looks sharper. I don't know, whatever. Just keep doing what you're doing." Vaughn smiled to himself, looking down at the heavy silver rings on his fingers. He knew Emily wasn't wrong. He did look better, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the expensive streetwear or the professional makeup. He had finally spent a fraction of his accumulated EXP. Knowing he was about to step in front of high-definition cameras for a massive corporate photo shoot and a $250K music video, Vaughn couldn't resist taking the step. Right now, his charm stat currently sat at a solid B, and it was clearly noticeable. Once the photo shoot finally wrapped, the Vanguard PR team selected the strongest image. It was a stark, high-contrast shot of Vaughn staring dead into the lens, wearing a heavy, studded leather jacket, his expression a mix of dark arrogance and undeniable star power. They sent it directly to Emily's phone, giving them the green light to break the internet. Sitting in the back of the black van on the ride back to Queens, Vaughn opened his Photogram and X apps. He uploaded the photo, taking a moment to draft the caption. He couldn't hide the genuine gratitude he felt toward the people who had literally fought a war for him. So he wrote, "Nagel, I usually let the music do the talking, but I gotta break character for a sec. Y'all are actually insane for what you did this week. The internet was talking a lot of nonsense, but my day ones really went to war and literally bullied a whole corporation into giving us the bag. I'm beyond grateful, FR. Y'all really changed my life. Massive shout out to @Vanguard Apparel for hearing the streets and tapping in. You wanted visuals? We're shooting a whole one. Masquerade official music video drops June 18th. The masks are finally coming off. We up." Ho! Within 5 minutes of hitting post, the internet flooded immediately. The V-stands, who had thought their week-long crusade had failed, erupted in sheer, unadulterated triumph. The president. We did it. I am literally screaming and crying in my bedroom right now. Vanguard came through, slow and curious. Look at him. He looks so incredibly good in that jacket. Julian is currently punching the air in his daddy's mansion. Sizzling Bacon 99. Oh my, Vanguard is the one backing. Oh my god, the visuals are going to be insane. This is the biggest underdog victory in music history. Lowercase guy. Julian West, count your days. The king has a camera crew now. The comments flooded in thousands. The sheer vindication was evident. They hadn't just gotten a music video. They had secured a partnership with one of the coolest brands in America. As the timeline celebrated, one comment near the top, with over 10,000 likes, caught Vaughn's eye. Pop culture junkie. Okay, the hype is real, but I genuinely wonder what the video will actually be about. What's the budget? What is the concept? It was the exact question Vaughn and Emily had to answer the very next morning. Vanguard had connected them with a highly sought-after, visionary music video director named Arthur Lincoln. Arthur was known in the industry for shooting dark, atmospheric, and highly stylized videos for massive hip-hop and alternative rock artists. They met Arthur in a trendy, glass-walled conference room in Vanguard's Manhattan offices. The director was a tall, lanky man, wearing a beanie and thick-rimmed glasses. "All right, Vaughn, Emily, it's a pleasure," Arthur said, pacing around the long wooden table. "We have a $250,000 budget. That is serious firepower. I've listened to Masquerade 100 times this weekend, and I must say, it's quite my vibe." Arthur began drawing on the whiteboard. "So, here is my vision. We rent out a massive mansion in upstate New York. We fill it with high-end luxury cars, Ferraris, Lamborghinis. We hire 50 models wearing designer gowns and masquerade masks. You're walking through the party, surrounded by all this fake plastic wealth representing the toxic industry. Then, when the beat drops, you start smashing everything. You take a baseball bat to the sports cars. You shatter the crystal chandeliers. It's high-budget destruction. It screams money, and it directly challenges Julian's clean castle anesthetic. People would eat it." Emily nodded slowly, considering the pitch. It was definitely cinematic, and it certainly utilized the budget. Smashing a rented Ferrari on camera would definitely go viral, even if it wasn't much real damage. But Vaughn sat quietly in his chair, staring at the whiteboard. He didn't want to just copy Julian's mansion aesthetic and destroy it. That felt too reactionary. He didn't want the video to be about wealth at all. Vaughn had another idea. Before he went back in time, there was a specific legendary music video that had perfectly captured the feeling he had now. He could adapt that exact concept like he's been doing with songs, and this was a proven solution. "Can I say something, Mr. Lincoln?" Vaughn finally spoke up. Chapter 84, Emote Upgrade. "Of course, Vaughn, it's your track. Talk to me." Arthur was very receptive, giving Vaughn the confidence to continue. "I respect the vision, but smashing Ferraris in a mansion that's playing Julian's game. Masquerade isn't about luxury, it's about how fake this entire industry is. If we put me in a mansion with models, we're just putting another mask on me." A proud smile touched Emily's lips as she watched him take control of the room. "So what's the alternative?" Arthur asked with intrigue. "We take the budget you'd spend on the cars and the mansion, and we rent the biggest warehouse in Brooklyn. We buy the best lights and cameras our money can get, and instead of hiring 50 paid models who don't care about the song, we invite 200 of my actual fans." Arthur's eyebrows shot up behind his glasses. "The internet just fought a war for me," Vaughn explained. "I want to give them the victory." There was a moment of silence that stretched for a while, as Arthur crossed eyes with him and then Emily before conceding. "All right, tell me more about your idea." So, the creative vision was locked. Now came the nightmare of logistics. Emily was in charge of that. Although a $250,000 budget was a whole lot, she still has to be clinical to put it to great use. 50 grand for Arthur's crew and the Ari Alexa camera packages, 30 grand for the warehouse rental and city permits, 50 grand for cinematic lighting rigs, strobes and lasers, 35 grand for post-production editing and color grading, 20 grand for insurance. That left exactly $65,000 to handle the most volatile element of the entire production, 500 human beings. If they went through a traditional Hollywood casting agency, paying standard SAG-AFTRA background actor rates for a 200 people would instantly bankrupt the production. But Vaughn didn't want professional extras who would check their watches and fake their enthusiasm. If we post an open casting call on your photogram, 1,000 people will show up and the NYPD will shut us down for inciting a riot, Emily explained on a Tuesday night. It has to be a covert operation. So how do we get them? Vaughn's question led Emily to pull up Subverse on her laptop. Miles away, Sasha was studying for a college midterm when a direct message pinged in her inbox. It was from a verified account she had never seen before. Ely_management. Ely_management. Hello, Sasha. This is Emily, Vaughn Varley's manager. I know you are the president of this community. We need to talk. Are you available for a phone call? Sasha stared at the screen for a full 60 seconds. She genuinely thought she was having a hallucination, and with trembling fingers, she typed out her phone number. 2 minutes later, her phone rang. Through the secure line, Emily efficiently laid out the master plan without missing a beat. She expressed gratitude on behalf of Vaughn for the Vanguard campaign that had taken over the internet, and then officially enlisted Sasha to organize the recruitment of 200 loyal New York local fans for the upcoming music video. Emily stressed the absolute necessity for secrecy, warning that any leaks could invite sabotage from Westworld Records. Sasha was tasked with creating a hidden, heavily vetted sign-up sheet exclusively within the trusted circles of the Subverse community. The incentives Emily detailed were massive. Vaughn, wanting to properly reward the people who had fought a digital war for him, had insisted on a generous flat payout of $150 per person for their time, completely bypassing the standard, meager rates typically given to background extras. On top of that, Vanguard Apparel was providing 200 pieces of their highly anticipated, unreleased Nightshade collection for the fans to wear during the shoot. Clothing that retailed for hundreds of dollars, which they would be allowed to keep once production wrapped. Sasha executed the covert operation with ease. She bypassed the casual listeners and zeroed in directly on the die-hard V-stans who had supported him since the establishment of the community. The response on the encrypted forum was instantaneous and overwhelming. Hundreds more would have gladly taken the day off work or skipped their college classes just for the chance to be in the same room as Vaughn, rendering the financial incentives and free luxury streetwear as mind-blowing bonuses rather than actual requirements for their participation. By the end of the week, non-disclosure agreements were signed, and the 200-person roster was firmly locked in without a single whisper reaching the mainstream media. On the morning of the shoot, the recruited fans were directed to secure rendezvous points across the city and transported via chartered black buses to a massive industrial warehouse deep in Brooklyn. Upon arrival, their phones were immediately confiscated by private security to enforce the strict media embargo. From there, Arthur Lincoln's production crew and Vanguard's styling team officially took over the logistics. The fans were ushered into massive, heated catering tents erected in the adjacent parking lot, where they swapped their everyday brightly colored winter coats for the heavy, studded black denim, dark tactical cargo pants, and thick combat boots of the Nightshade collection. Finally, each fan was handed a featureless, pristine white masquerade mask, completing their transformation into a cohesive underground army. Inside the cavernous main warehouse floor, massive Arri Alexa cinema cameras hung from mechanical cranes, sweeping over the concrete floor. The fans were introduced to the production's stunt and crowd coordinator, a burly, heavily tattooed veteran of the industry who quickly gathered them for a mandatory safety briefing. Their part in the video wasn't overly complicated, but it required absolute discipline. The coordinator walked them through the sequence. Initially, they were to stand completely motionless under the dim lighting, acting as brainwashed, faceless corporate drones. They couldn't sway, fidget, or react to the cameras. The critical moment of the shoot would come when Vaughn, wearing a golden mask, entered the room and threw his mask to the concrete floor. At that exact second, the heavy trap beat would drop through the massive concert subwoofers, and the fans were instructed to violently rip off their white masks and explode into a chaotic, high-energy mosh pit. Safety was paramount, so the coordinator spent the next hour drilling them on how to jump, push, and thrash aggressively for the lenses without actually throwing elbows or injuring the person next to them. While the fans were being drilled on the ground floor of the Brooklyn set, Vaughn was isolated in a sparse hotel room a few miles away, meticulously practicing his own role. He paced the length of the carpet, rehearsing the heavy, burdened walk of a man breaking under the manufactured weight of the music industry. He practiced clawing at his face, simulating the desperate struggle of trying to rip off a metaphorical mask that was slowly suffocating him. But physical practice could only take him so far. Vaughn needed his performance to be undeniably authentic. It had to translate through the cameras and permanently burn itself into the memory of everyone watching. To guarantee that level of impact, Vaughn summoned his translucent blue interface. He had already drained a significant portion of his reserves, pushing his charm stat to a B. But he knew the visual component of this music video required more than just a sharper jawline and a magnetic physical appeal. He navigated to the skill tab and focused on the psychological tool he had largely neglected since navigating the toxic politics of his reality TV days. With a few focused mental commands, he poured his hard-earned points into upgrading his emotional projection. Skill: Emote, Rank B. Description: the emotions you wish to convey become undeniably real, capable of convincing anyone as far as their willpower allows. Your own body genuinely believes these projected emotions, automatically adapting your expressions to convey them with perfection. Cost: 20 EXP per minute. Warning: prolonged projection of emotions may have adverse effects. Vaughn stared at the translucent blue text, a mix of genuine excitement and bitter disappointment swirling in his chest. The sheer manipulative power of the upgrade was incredible, exactly what he needed for the video shoot. But the fact that it had mutated from a passive enhancement into an active drain was a massive blow to his already depleted reserves. He mentally summoned his status panel, wincing at the number staring back at him. EXP: 220. Well, Vaughn sighed, running a hand through his hair. Let's test this out and hope it's worth it. He stepped close to the full-length mirror in the hotel room and activated the skill, channeling a deep, crushing sense of sorrow. Immediately, faint, dust-like motes of light began flickering in the air around his shoulders. Vaughn blinked, hoping that the visual effect was something only he could see through the system interface. The physical shift, however, was instantaneous. His throat tightened painfully, his chest heaved, and without any conscious effort, tears welled up in his violet eyes and spilled down his cheeks. The despair felt so incredibly real that it actually fooled his own brain for a second. He felt a profound, aching grief settle into his soul. Impressed, but needing a second opinion, Vaughn turned away from the mirror and dropped to his knees in front of Loki, who was curled up on the hotel armchair. Tears still streaming down his face, Vaughn let out a perfectly crafted, heartbreaking sob, looking at the void links with devastation. Loki slowly blinked her glowing violet eyes. She stared at his tear-streaked face for 3 seconds before letting out an uninterested yawn, completely ignoring his performance. Vaughn instantly dropped the skill, his fake sorrow immediately replaced by a flush of embarrassment. "It's legit. Good to know," Vaughn muttered, quickly deactivating the skill to save his remaining 200 EXP. Regardless, the test had proven one thing. If the skill could make his own body believe the lie, the cameras wouldn't stand a chance. Just as he grabbed his heavy Vanguard jacket from the back of a chair and slipped his arms through the sleeves, his phone buzzed loudly on the nightstand. He picked it up. It was a brief text message from Arthur Lincoln. "The fans are in position and fully briefed. We're ready for you." Chapter 85, Music Video Shoot. 5:03 p.m., Friday, June 15th, 2019, Brooklyn Warehouse, New York. The black SUV sent out by Vanguard pulled up to the rear loading dock of the massive industrial complex. Vaughn stepped out into the late afternoon air, pulling the collar of his jacket up. The sheer scale of the operation was immediately apparent. Thick black cables snaked across the asphalt like giant serpents, feeding power from 3 diesel generators into the belly of the warehouse. Inside, the environment was a hive of controlled activity. Dozens of crew members dressed in all black darted around with walkie-talkies and rolls of gaffer tape. Before Vaughn could even take off his sunglasses, Arthur Lincoln was marching toward him. "Vaughn, you're here. Let's walk and talk," Arthur said, barely breaking his stride as he gestured for Vaughn and Emily to follow him toward the video village. "We've got the fans drilled and resting. The lighting grid is balanced, but we made a slight adjustment to the choreography of the walkout." "What kind of adjustment?" Vaughn asked, stepping over a thick bundle of wires. "We are doing the transition in one continuous Steadicam shot," Arthur explained, pointing toward a burly camera operator wearing a complex mechanical vest that held the massive Arri Alexa camera. "From the moment you break out of the white room, down the dark hallway, and straight through the double doors into the mosh pit, there won't be any cuts. It keeps the raw, visceral energy intact and saves us a fortune in post-production splicing." Arthur stopped and turned to face Vaughn. "But one takes are a nightmare. If the focus puller messes up, if a fan trips, or if you drop your intensity for even a split second, we have to reset the entire warehouse. It all depends on you, Vaughn. You need to give me a flawless performance right out of the gate. I don't want to do multiple takes of this." "You won't have to," Vaughn said smoothly, though he was acutely aware of his ticking EXP clock. He only had 230 EXP left. At 20 EXP a minute, he had exactly 11.5 minutes of absolute perfection in him. Good, now come meet your army. Arthur smirked, leading them toward the holding area. 200 fans were currently lounging on folding chairs and metal crates, drinking water and resting their legs after an exhausting hour of stunt coordination. They all wore the dark, heavy Vanguard nightshade gear, their pristine white masquerade masks resting on their laps or pushed up onto their foreheads. When Vaughn walked around the partition, it took exactly 3 seconds for someone to notice him. A girl in the second row gasped loudly, dropping her water bottle. The sound echoed, and suddenly 200 heads snapped in his direction. "Oh my God, Vaughn." The holding area erupted. It wasn't a stadium of thousands, but the sheer concentrated volume of 200 die-hard V-stands screaming his name was deafening. They jumped to their feet as disbelief and euphoria washed over them. Even though they had signed the NDAs and knew exactly why they were there, the reality of Von Varley actually standing 10 feet away from them, wearing the same streetwear they were wearing, broke their composure. Vaughn grinned, letting his natural aura flare just enough to warm the room. He didn't hold back his appreciation. He gave a deep, theatrical bow, straightened up, and blew a kiss to the crowd. "Thank you, y'all. It's an absolute pleasure to work with you for real. You fought for this budget, so today we're making history together." The fans cheered again, their faces practically glowing with pride and adrenaline. "All right, save the bonding for the rap party." Arthur's voice boomed over the PA system, cutting through the excitement. "We are losing daylight, and we have a movie to make. So, masks on. Get to your marks in the main floor. Vaughn, you'll head to the white box." The atmosphere instantly shifted from a fan meet and greet to a high-stakes Hollywood set. The fans, highly disciplined from their earlier training, immediately fell silent, slipped their eerie white masks over their faces, and marched out to the main warehouse floor. Vaughn was led in the opposite direction, stepping into the sterile box. It was a brilliantly constructed nightmare, a perfectly square room built with blindingly white, seamless walls, flooded with harsh, shadowless fluorescent light. In the dead center sat a single white chair. "Take a seat," a wardrobe assistant whispered, adjusting the collar of Vaughn's jacket. Vaughn sat down. 5 professional stuntmen, dressed in white corporate suits and wearing blank white masks, surrounded him. One placed a hand heavily on Vaughn's shoulder, pressing him firmly into the chair, almost as if he were shackled to it. Another stood in front of him, holding a makeup brush, ready to paint something on his fact. "Camera is rolling. Sound speeding," the first assistant director yelled from the shadows outside the box. Vaughn closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, visualizing the oppressive weight of the Star Mansion. Skill, emote, rank B, activated, -20 XP/min. When Vaughn opened his violet eyes behind his golden mask, the shift was terrifying. A thin layer of sweat broke out on his forehead, and the air in the white room seemed to plummet in temperature. The actor holding Vaughn's shoulder actually flinched, feeling a deeply unsettling aura radiating from Vaughn's body. Action! The haunting, melancholic piano intro of Masquerade began playing softly over the speakers. The 5 executives hovered over Vaughn like vultures, aggressively powdering his neck, adjusting his collar, and trying to physically force his posture into a submissive slouch. Vaughn let his body go rigid, projecting the exhaustion of a captive. "You put the weight on my back, and I let you." Vaughn sang the slow intro with fatigue. For a while, he continued struggling to leave the stool, but all his efforts were useless, so he continued singing in defeat, until the turning point arrived. "Dasting with the lie till the party's over, Masquerade." The piano vanished, and the heavy, distorted 808 trap beat slammed into the soundstage. The beat seemed to give Vaughn confidence as he immediately exploded from the white stool. He grabbed the wrist of the executive trying to fix his jacket and twisted violently, shoving the man backward into the stark white wall. Because they were seasoned stuntmen, the actor took the impact with perfection, throwing himself into the drywall to sell the hit. Vaughn didn't stop. He ducked under a grabbing arm from a second executive and drove a harsh, choreographed elbow into the man's chest. He shoved the remaining 3 aside, throwing them off balance, and kicked the white stool out of his way. Leaving the executives groaning on the floor, Vaughn marched straight out of the blindingly bright set. The Steadicam operator backpedaled smoothly to keep him in frame. Vaughn stalked down the dimly lit concrete hallway of the warehouse. The lighting above him flickered violently. He was rapping now with an aggressive flow. Still wearing the golden mask, he clawed at the edges of it as he walked, but he just couldn't get it off his face no matter how much he yanked at it. It was a struggle that seemed so real and horrifying. Caught up in all these lights and cameras, but look what that room did to manners. Vaughn reached the end of the corridor. Ahead of him was a set of steel double doors. With a violent kick, Vaughn forced them open and stepped out onto a raised metal that overlooked the massive main warehouse floor. Below him, it was pure chaos. The lights glowed frantically, and the 200 V-stands, decked out in their black Vanguard gear and white masks, were thrashing and moshing to the heavy trap beat. Vaughn stepped to the edge of the platform railing and began watching them in confusion. They danced to the song for a while, and he sang like he was in a trance, until he shook his head. Something wasn't right. Vaughn held the sides of the golden mask, and with a full-body groan, he ripped it off his face. Instantly, the playback music was killed, and there was only silence in the massive warehouse. Below him, the 200 fans froze completely. Mid-sway, mid-shout, mid-thrash, they turned into breathless statues under the dimming lights. Standing on the raised platform, Vaughn stood frozen as well. His chest was heaving violently, and his forehead was coated in sweat. Through the active emote skill, he channeled terror through his face. He now looked like a man who had just escaped a psychological torture chamber. He panted heavily, his eyes wide and trembling as he stared into the hollow inside of the golden mask in his hands. Slowly, horizontally, he looked down at the sea of frozen, white-masked faces below him. The horror on his face deepened. He looked terrified of the reality he had uncovered. He looked back at the golden mask and his fingers trembled. Then he let it drop. Clack. The sound of the heavy prop hitting the metal grating echoed through the dead-quiet warehouse. Vaughn stared at it for a fraction of a second before the fear vanished, instantly replaced by explosive rage. He raised his heavy combat boot and brought it down with a furious, devastating stomp. Crack. The specialized breakaway material of the mask shattered instantly, sending golden shards scattering across the metal platform. Vaughn slowly raised his head, looking back down at the frozen fans. Then, as if a dark spell had been broken by the shattering of the gold, the crowd moved. In perfect unison, 200 hands reached up, grabbed their white plastic masks, and tore them away, revealing their true, flushed faces. 200 heavy combat boots raised into the air and stomped down simultaneously, crushing the white plastic into dust against the concrete floor. A slow, manic smile began to stretch across Vaughn's sweaty face. The fear was entirely gone, replaced by unhinged euphoria of liberation. He stepped right up to the edge of the railing and spread his arms wide, like a conductor welcoming a symphony of chaos. The 808 trap beat exploded back to life through the massive subwoofers. The strobe lights went hyperactive. The mosh pit below went completely feral. Vaughn held the railing, leaning over his screaming, unmasked army, rapping the final aggressive verses directly to them as they jumped, threw water into the air, and roared the lyrics back at him. Vaughn began to use resonance right away, and under the influence of his emotion, it felt like the birth of a revolution. After a while, the beat abruptly cut out. The frantic strobe snapped off, plunging the warehouse into pitch darkness. A single, harsh white spotlight slammed down from the rafters, illuminating only Vaughn on the platform. Below him, the fans froze once more, panting heavily in the dark, dasting with the lie till the party's over masquerade. Vaughn delivered the final outro directly with his head face down and his chest rising and falling. He held the final note, letting it echo into the darkness before Arthur's voice came through. Cut. Chapter 86. Music Video Premiere. That is a print. Holy shit, that is a print. Arthur kept screaming in excitement. He had really gotten everything he wanted. The warehouse, meanwhile, erupted. The 200 fans, previously frozen in the pitch-black silence, completely lost their minds, cheering and howling into the dark. Up on the metal grating, Vaughn slumped against the railing. He immediately deactivated the skills. The sudden withdrawal of the intense, manufactured terror and the heavy projection left him feeling hollowed out and physically exhausted for some reason. His chest continued heaving even though he wasn't projecting any emotion anymore. But soon, the house lights came on, flooding the warehouse and giving him a chance to recollect. EXP. Okenta. Vaughn smiled wryly. He had cut it incredibly close, burning through 120 EXP, but the payoff was undeniable. As he walked down the metal stairs to the main floor, Arthur Lincoln sprinted over and practically tackled him in a massive hug. "I have been directing music videos for a decade, Vaughn," Arthur laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. "I have never seen anyone nail a one-take like that on the first try. The transition? The look of absolute horror when you dropped the mask? We don't need to shoot anything else. We have our movie." The rest of the evening morphed into a massive, euphoric rap party. The heavy tension of the shoot evaporated. Vanguard's catering trucks opened their windows, serving up hot food to the exhausted, sweating V-stands. Vaughn spent the next 2 hours completely immersed in the crowd. He signed the backs of the black denim jackets, posed for hundreds of photos, and listened to their stories. These were the fans who had believed in him. Standing among them, Vaughn felt a profound sense of loyalty that went far beyond mere fan service. As the night drew to a close and the chartered buses arrived to take the fans back to their designated drop-off points, Emily climbed onto a wooden crate with a megaphone. "All right, everyone," Emily projected, her voice commanding instant attention. "You guys were the absolute heartbeat of this production today. But remember the contracts you signed. We are orchestrating a surprise drop. Please, do not post a single word until the video officially premieres. We want to completely blindside the industry. Understood?" "Yes," the crowd roared back in unison. Their phones were returned, and within 30 minutes the warehouse was empty save for the crew breaking down the massive lighting rigs. The shoot was officially wrapped. Unlike their usual frantic schedule of gigging and hopping on flights to the next city, Vaughn and Emily didn't leave New York. The Vanguard partnership required them to stay local, shifting their focus from performance to post-production and corporate strategy. On Sunday morning, they were chauffeured to Vanguard Apparel's massive, glass-walled headquarters in Manhattan. They sat in a sleek boardroom with Marcus Vance, the chief marketing officer, and his executive team. The meeting was a crash course in high-level corporate synergy. Vanguard wasn't just dropping a video. They were launching an entire ecosystem around it. "The Nightshade collection you and the fans wore in the video goes live on our e-commerce site the exact minute the video premieres," Marcus explained, pointing to a slideshow. "We've also purchased digital billboard space in Times Square, Shibuya in Tokyo, and Piccadilly Circus in London. The moment the video drops, those boards will play a 10-second loop of the mosh pit with the text, 'The masks are off.'" Vaughn nodded, taking a sip of his black coffee. "And the rollout on Inktube? We've bought premium ad placement on the platform's homepage for 24 hours, Emily chimed in, having already coordinated with Vanguard's digital team. "But the initial push will be completely organic. We'll set up a live premiere waiting room on Monday night." After the corporate meetings, Vaughn spent Monday entirely in the editing bay with Arthur Lincoln. Even though the video was shot in one continuous take, the post-production process was meticulous and crucial. Vaughn sat on a leather sofa in the dark studio, watching as Arthur's lead colorist worked magic on the Ari Alexa footage. "Watch this," Arthur said, pointing to the monitor. "We're going to completely desaturate the white room. Make it look almost painfully bright, like a hospital." The colorist tweaked the dials, and the opening scene instantly felt 10 times more clinical and suffocating. "And when you kick the doors open to the warehouse," Arthur continued. The editor scrubbed forward on the timeline. "We crank the contrast, deep inky blacks, and we make the red lasers pop so hard they almost bleed off the screen." Next came the sound design. The visual one-take was flawless, but they needed to enhance the audio impact. The sound engineer meticulously synced Patch's heavy master track to the visuals. They added subtle, cinematic Foley effects, the harsh clack of the golden mask hitting the metal grating, the devastating crack when Vaughn stomped on it, and the muffled, roaring ambiance of the crowd during the mosh pit. When they finally watched the finished master file from start to finish on the studio's massive projector, the room fell dead silent. It was a masterpiece, truly. Tuesday morning, 9:45 a.m. EST. Inside Vaughn's hotel room, Vaughn and Emily sat perfectly still in front of Emily's laptop, which was hooked up to a sleek flat-screen monitor. Neither of them had spoken for the last 10 minutes. On the screen, the Inktube Premiere lobby was handling massive traffic. The sheer velocity of users flooding into the Masquerade official music video waiting room was truly unexpected, and the texts were flying in too quickly. "Always want to give you up. Men. I've heard a lot about the director involved. This shit's gonna be lit, men. Boring train. Nah, my money's on it flopping. Vaughn doesn't have any label or experience, so they're definitely mismanaging the money. Toilet chef. I can't wait again, guys. Why's the time so fucking slow? Emily ignored the busy comment section and glanced over at Vaughn. 500,000 people are waiting to watch this live. That's crazy. Vaughn didn't need anyone to tell him, but he hoped he won't leave them disappointed. Let's see if they like it. He crossed his hands and relaxed on his seat, although his heart was hammering within. At exactly 10 a.m., the countdown hit 0. The chat temporarily vanished, the screen went black, and a stark, minimalist title card appeared. Presented by Vanguard Apparel. Then, the haunting piano intro began, and the visual of the sterile box faded in. Seeing the final product, fully color-graded and synced, was a completely different experience than living it. Through the high-definition lenses, Vaughn's performance was terrifyingly authentic. Every subtle twitch of his body, the deadened look in his violet eyes, and the suffocating panic he radiated translated through the screen with incredible weight. When he shoved the masked corporate drone and kicked over the chair, everyone began feeling it a lot more. The camera tracked him down the dark, flickering hallway. The tension was agonizing. And then he hit the heavy steel doors. Boom! The 808 trap beat dropped. The laser grid ignited. Vaughn ripped the golden mask off. The camera caught the exact moment of horror, followed by the shattering stomp. Then, the 200 V-stands ripped off their white masks. The screen exploded into a sweaty, chaotic, unhinged mosh pit. The Vanguard Nightshade streetwear looked incredibly raw under the violent flashes of the strobe lights. It didn't look like a standard pop-rap music video. It looked like a gritty, high-budget documentary of an underground uprising. When the video finally cut to black after the haunting outro, the comments section began to fill once again. Pop culture junkie. Bro, was that a one take? Arthur Lincoln and Vaughn just reinvented the music video. Sizzling Bacon 99. The chills I got when he stomped the mask. The symbolism is insane. Kiss my axe. Julian is crying in his plastic castle right now. Vanguard gear goes so hard. The chat moved so fast it was impossible to read every single message, but the overall sentiment was undeniably clear. The internet was completely blown away. 10 hours later. X trending topics worldwide. 1. Billiker Burgelwater announces his 2020 re-election bid. 2. Masquerade music video. 3. Vanguard Nightshade. 4. Vaughn Varley. 5. Former Iran President Amir Ali died. Vaughn couldn't believe it himself. He sat on the edge of his hotel bed, refreshing his Inktube Studio app over and over again just to make sure the numbers weren't a glitch. In exactly 10 hours, the video had crossed the 1 million view milestone. Even crazier, his subscriber count had skyrocketed from a modest 2,600 to an incredible 89,000. And the momentum wasn't slowing down. The media landscape shifted almost instantly. Major publications that had regurgitated Julian's PR spin just a week prior were frantically backpedaling. Articles flooded the timeline with massive headlines praising the sheer creativity, raw acting, and flawless execution of the video. The TikTok fad narrative was dead and buried. The following evening, just before Vaughn and Emily were scheduled to finally travel back to their home, Vanguard hosted a lavish celebratory dinner. It took place in a private dining room at a high-end Manhattan steakhouse. The atmosphere was electric, filled with clinking glasses and expensive champagne. As the dinner wound down, Marcus Vance, the chief marketing officer, gestured for Vaughn and Emily to follow him. He led them away from the loud chatter and out onto a quiet, glass-enclosed balcony overlooking the glittering city skyline. "I wanted to speak to you both away from the noise," Marcus began, leaning against the glass railing with a satisfied grin. "I'll keep it brief. Our servers crashed 3 times today. The entire Nightshade collection got sold out completely. We have pre-orders backed up for the next 4 months. It's been an absolute pleasure doing business with you, Vaughn." "The feeling is mutual, Marcus," Vaughn said smoothly, genuinely impressed by the sheer scale of the corporate machinery he had just tapped into. "Because of this," Marcus continued, turning to Emily, "Vanguard wants to lock you in. We are officially offering Vaughn a long-term brand ambassador contract. It's a highly lucrative deal. My legal team will send the terms to your inbox by tomorrow morning." Emily nodded, her professional mask slipping just enough to show a triumphant smile. "We'll be looking forward to reviewing it." "Excellent," Marcus said. He pushed off the railing and adjusted his suit jacket, his expression suddenly shifting to something much more serious. "But before you head out, there's one more thing. A friend of mine is about to come up here and see you. She wants to discuss something that can greatly affect your music career. Chapter 87. Tempting Offer. The last part of Marcus's statement left Vaughn feeling incredibly wary. A surprise guest at a corporate celebration rarely meant anything good. However, considering the massive check Vanguard had just cut him and the success they were currently riding, he couldn't exactly reject the introduction. Vaughn gave a slow nod. "All right, Marcus, I'd love to see her." With his affirmation, Marcus pulled out his phone, tapping a quick message. It only took a minute before the heavy glass doors slid open. A woman walked onto the balcony, instantly commanding the space. She had striking white hair that looked deliberately dyed and perfectly styled. She was dressed in a provocative, high-end red dress that contrasted sharply with the dark New York night. Slung over her shoulder was a designer handbag that cost as much as a car. Every step she took radiated pure, unfiltered authority. It was clear from a single glance that she was an absolute big shot. Marcus smiled warmly at her, stepping forward to exchange a brief half-hug. He then turned and pointed over to where Vaughn and Emily stood by the railing. "Diana, meet Vaughn and his manager Emily," Marcus introduced smoothly. "Vaughn, this is Diana. She has something to discuss with you." Vaughn stepped forward and accepted her slender fingers, offering a bright, polite smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Lady Diana." Marcus saw they were settling in well. He gave Vaughn a small, encouraging pat on the back. "I'll leave you to it," he said, slipping back through the glass doors and leaving the balcony entirely to them. Shortly after Marcus left, a heavy silence fell over the balcony. Vaughn stood there, wondering why neither of the women had said anything yet. The air was incredibly tense. A quick glance at Emily told him all he needed to know. The two ladies were locked in a tense, unblinking staring contest. Emily was the first to break the silence. "Diana," Emily said, her voice dropping to a cold, guarded whisper. "Hello, Emily," the woman replied smoothly. She offered a small, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It has been quite a while. You look well. A bit tired, perhaps, but well." Vaughn glanced between the two of them, his eyes narrowing slightly. He didn't need any help to read the massive history hanging in the air. "Vaughn," Emily said, stepping slightly in front of him. Her protective instincts flared immediately, shielding him like a bodyguard. "This is Diana Sterling. She is the CEO of Circle Media. They are the biggest management and entertainment conglomerate on the East Coast." Vaughn didn't know everything about record labels yet, but with the specific, heavy way Emily mentioned the name, it was crystal clear how big they were. They were the apex predators of the music industry. "It's a pleasure, Vaughn," Diana said. She completely ignored Emily's defensive stance and uncalled explanation, stepping around her to extend a hand to Vaughn once again. "I have to admit," Diana continued, "watching you dismantle Julian West over the last month has been the most entertaining thing to happen in this industry in years. You are a remarkably talented young man. Appreciate it. So, what does Circle Media want with an indie kid?" Diana withdrew her hand and looked directly at Emily. "Emily, dear, you have done an admirable job getting him this far, truly, but I need to speak with Vaughn alone for a moment. Business regarding his long-term future." Emily's eyes flashed with pure anger. "I am his manager, Diana. Anything you have to say to my client, you can say to me." "This isn't a negotiation for a brand deal, Emily," Diana said softly. The polite veneer finally dropped just a fraction, revealing the ruthless shark underneath. "This is a conversation about the ceiling of his career. Please, 5 minutes." Emily opened her mouth to argue, ready to tear into the executive, but Vaughn placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, Em," Vaughn said calmly. He squeezed her shoulder reassuringly before meeting Diana's eyes with a hard gaze. "I can't hold any conversation with you in the absence of my agent. If it's not possible to speak with her here, then we'll take our leave." Vaughn's blunt comment seemed to make Diana frown. The refusal clearly annoyed her, but she masked it quickly. She smiled at the end and began walking over to the edge of the balcony, looking out over the glittering city lights. "Interesting," Diana suddenly said, turning her head slightly to look at Emily. "You're fiercely loyal to him. That is unlike you, Emily. But loyalty doesn't pay for stadium tours, Vaughn." "What do you mean?" Vaughn took the initiative to ask, already knowing deep down where this conversation was heading. Diana turned around to face him fully, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. "I mean, it must be hard on you, carrying all the burden by yourself. There's only so much you two can do." Vaughn recognized the threat immediately. It was wrapped in fake sympathy, but it was a threat nonetheless. Before he could respond, Emily stepped forward. "We're doing all right. Top 3 on the charts as of today. A $250,000 Vanguard deal. I think we're doing beautifully." "You are," Diana agreed. She kept her attention focused entirely on Vaughn, deliberately ignoring Emily's defense. You executed a brilliant guerrilla marketing campaign. You weaponized your fan base. It was a beautiful stunt. But Vaughn, that's all it was, a stunt. You caught lightning in a bottle with masquerade. Diana finally turned her gaze to Emily. What happens next? What happens when you need to drop an entire album? An album requires a lot of money and studio time, elite producers, global distribution networks, and radio syndication. You can't crowdfund a Grammy-winning album on a Subverse forum. I'm sorry to say this, Vaughn, but you've hit the ceiling of what an independent artist can achieve in the modern era. Vaughn remained silent. Internally, however, he hated how much sense she was making. She was hitting the nail right on the head. He was currently broke on liquid cash. Even when his streaming payouts arrived, he still had major debts to pay off. He had promises to fulfill for Naomi and Zach. It simply wasn't realistic to experiment with creating 10 more high-quality songs anytime soon. Julian West is backed by Westworld Records, Diana continued softly, sensing his hesitation. He has an infinite war chest. You gave him a bloody nose, yes, but he isn't dead. When his album drops, his label will buy up every radio station in the country to bury you. So what's the pitch? Vaughn asked, cutting straight to the chase. He was tired of the industry games. Circle Media wants to acquire you, Vaughn, Diana stated with a now serious, commanding voice. We want to bring you in-house, a joint venture record deal and global management. If you sign with us, I will write you a $5 million advance check tomorrow morning. We will pair you with the best producers in the world. We will fund your debut album, and we will build a promotional machine behind it that will make Vanguard look like a lemonade stand. We will ensure that Julian West never sees the top of a chart again. Chapter 88, $5 million. Vaughn stared at her. $5 million. The number echoed loudly in his head. It wasn't just money. It was life-changing, generational wealth. It meant buying a house immediately. It meant never having to worry about budget constraints, camera rentals, or begging for corporate sponsorships ever again. It was the exact power he needed to truly become a king in this industry. What's the catch? No catch, Diana smiled warmly. Just a standard 360 deal. We take a percentage of your touring, your merchandise, and your masters. And of course, you would have to transition your management to our elite internal team. Vaughn's eyes went cold instantly. You want me to fire Emily? Emily Brooklyn is a fantastic assistant, seriously, Diana said with a straight face, using the name like a weapon. But she was blacklisted from the major leagues for a reason. She doesn't have the leverage to handle a global superstar. I am offering you the keys to the kingdom, Vaughn. Don't let a misplaced sense of loyalty keep you locked out. Don't you dare, Emily finally snapped, and her composure shattered. She stepped forward, her hands balled into tight fists. Don't you dare stand there and pretend you care about his career, Diana. You just want to own him before he gets too big for you to control. Diana let out a short and dismissive laugh. Emily, please, stop projecting your own failures onto him. She looked back at Vaughn, her expression turning deadly serious. She doesn't want the best for you, Vaughn. She wants you to stay small so she can feel important. I am giving you the world. But it's up to you to decide. Diana reached into her designer handbag. She pulled out a sleek, matte black business card with the silver Circle Media logo stamped on the front. She held it out to him. Vaughn didn't reach for it. He just stared at her. Without breaking eye contact, Diana reached over and tucked the heavy card directly into the front pocket of Vaughn's jacket. Think about it, Diana said, her voice returning to that smooth, polite purr. I'll give you until Friday. And don't bother about your contract with her, Diana added, throwing one last, dismissive glance at Emily. We'll settle her adequately. I'll be expecting your call. With that, Diana slid the door open and vanished back into the loud, crowded steakhouse, leaving Vaughn and Emily standing alone in the cold New York air. Emily remained still. Her mind was still mulling over what had just happened. Deep down, she knew Diana was wrong. With her bad stain, she'll only hold back Vaughn, and the offer was perfect for him. Vaughn, meanwhile, reached into his jacket pocket. His fingers brushed against the sleek, matte black business card Diana had tucked there. He pulled it out, turning it over in the dim light. The silver Circle Media logo gleamed arrogantly. $5 million, Emily whispered to the wind. She offered you $5 million, Vaughn. I was standing right here, Em. I heard her. She's right, Emily finally conceded, her voice cracking slightly. She finally turned to look at him, and Vaughn was shocked to see genuine defeat in her eyes. She is a snake, and she is ruthless, but she isn't lying about the ceiling. I can hustle, but I can't fund a multi-million-dollar global stadium tour out of my checking account. You'll remain held back with me. Vaughn frowned, stepping closer to her. What are you saying? I'm saying you should take the card and call her, Emily said, trying to sound tough. It's a $5 million advance. It guarantees your career as long as you remain focused. You. And what about you? Vaughn interrupted her, his violet eyes locking onto hers. I'll be fine. Like Diana said, I'll get an adequate settlement. I can take that money and start up something new. Don't bother about me. Vaughn stared at her for a long, heavy moment. He looked at the woman who had found him when he was a reality TV outcast and had sacrificed so much despite her mental scars just to build him. Vaughn slowly lifted his right hand, holding the sleek black business card between his index and middle fingers. A 30 deal, huh? Vaughn muttered, looking down at the card. Yes, Emily sighed. They take a cut of your touring, your merch, your sponsorships, your masters, everything. But in exchange, they give you the world. You know what that sounds like to me? Vaughn asked. He stepped right up to the edge of the glass railing and leaned his face close to hers. It sounds like a white room. It sounds like a bunch of executives in white masks trying to powder my face and tell me how to smile. Before Emily could process his words, Vaughn's hands moved. With a swift, aggressive tear, he ripped the heavy cardstock perfectly in half, right before her face. Emily gasped, but Vaughn didn't stop. He stacked the halves and ripped them again. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he tossed the shredded pieces of the Circle Media business card over the edge of the balcony. They fluttered away into the dark New York wind, swallowed entirely by the city. Vaughn, what did you just do? Emily breathed in disbelief. That was $5 million. Nah, that was a leash, Vaughn corrected her with a laugh. Diana Sterling doesn't want to build me. She wants to own me. If I sign that contract, I'm just putting the golden mask back on. So I good here. His decision seemed immature and arrogant, like something as wrong a non-professional would do. But Vaughn had thought long about this. Even though he was in for the money, above all he wanted to be different. He couldn't imagine himself being controlled by someone in that way. Vaughn turned to face Emily once again. We just hit top 3 on the Billboard charts. We just crashed Vanguard's servers and sold out an entire fashion line in 12 minutes. We did that, you and me. We did it all without any label. Emily stared at him, the defeat in her eyes slowly cracking, replaced by a flickering spark of the old fire. We don't need Circle Media to build a kingdom, Vaughn declared. We are going to build our own, and we'll get to keep everything along the way. Vaughn offered her an arrogant grin and stretched his hand. So, Emily Brooklyn, are you going to stand there and cry about a snake in a red dress, or are you going to help me bury her? The silence stretched for 3 seconds. Then, Emily let out a sharp exhale. The tension drained from her shoulders, and a predatory smile slowly spread across her face. The armor was back. You're a stubborn kid, you know that? Emily smirked. But hell yeah, I'm in. Her hands met his, and a note rang through Vaughn's head immediately. Ding! It was at that moment the system came alive from its slumber. System alert. Narrative shift detected. You have officially rejected the path of corporate subjugation. The independent king narrative has been solidified. New milestone quest triggered. The Empire Business. Chapter 89. Rich. New milestone quest triggered. The Empire Business. Objective: establish a legally recognized independent record label and successfully release a debut album, minimum 10 tracks. Reward: 5,000 EXP, 1x S-grade skill. Title: Mogul. Failure penalty: inability to complete the quest before the deadline will permanently reset your vocal stat to base level. Deadline: October 30th. 2019. Vaughn stared at the glowing blue text floating in his vision, his eyes widening in awe. He couldn't help but smile wryly. If he had previously harbored any thoughts of taking it easy and riding the wave of his hit single for a few more months, the system had just forcefully erased that option. A permanent reset of his vocals stat would essentially end his career. He didn't have a choice but to lock in and record a full studio album. Still, it was a massive plus for his long-term strategy. Dropping a debut album now would perfectly capitalize on the insane global hype Masquerade was currently generating. Plus, he already had a handful of unreleased originals from his Project Star days. He wasn't starting entirely from scratch. Vaughn swiped the blue screen away and returned his attention to Emily. "We're gonna do pretty alright, Em," Vaughn said, offering her a confident nod. Let's go home and get to work. The rest of June was anything but smooth sailing. Returning to Queens didn't mean returning to a quiet life. The internet was completely ablaze, and Emily had to navigate a minefield of daily press requests, podcast invitations, and aggressive sponsorship emails. They spent the next 2 weeks practically living out of black SUVs, doing a grueling circuit of radio interviews, magazine photo shoots, and late-night digital appearances just to keep the masquerade momentum at a boiling point. Tuesday, July 2nd, 2019. Vaughn lay back on the fabric of the living room couch, absently trailing a hand over Loki's soft, dark fur. The small apartment hadn't changed at all in the past few weeks. Despite his sudden meteoric rise to fame, Vaughn simply hadn't had the time or the energy to move out or buy new furniture. As he waited for Emily to arrive, Vaughn pulled up his system interface. The void links had indeed leveled up in this while. System pet acquired. Species: void links. Name: Loki. Level 2. Emote resonance: 15%. Skills: Shadow Morph, B. Emote consumer, A. Vaughn tapped on the new, highly graded skill to read its description. Emote consumer, A. Description: allows the void links to permanently consume and eradicate emotions in the surrounding environment. Cost: 10% emote resonance per use. Vaughn stared at the text, initially confused by the mechanics, but the implications quickly clicked into place. It was both powerful and slightly scary. Loki's innate ability allowed her to passively feed on the excess emotional energy that was generated, but this new active A-grade skill meant she could act as a literal psychological vacuum. It was an incredible tool for navigating the high-pressure music industry, but the warning label was clear. Loki could consume genuine positive emotions too, like the excitement of excited fans. He hadn't really wanted her to use it yet, preferring to wait for a desperate, high-stakes opportunity before testing an A-grade psychological wipe on himself or Emily. Just as he closed the interface, 3 sharp knocks rapped against the apartment door. Vaughn sat up, carefully moving Loki to the cushion beside him, and unlocked the door. Emily stood in the hallway. She was absolutely beaming. The heavy dark circles that usually lived under her eyes were completely gone. Her hair was styled perfectly, and she was wearing a sharp designer blazer over a simple white t-shirt. "You're looking gorgeous today," Vaughn said honestly, stepping back to let her in. "Oh, shut up, Vaughn." Emily waved the compliment aside with a laugh. He really meant it, though. The transformation over the last few weeks was undeniable. She had entirely stopped her bad habit of chain smoking. The sheer volume of high-level meetings and constant press runs meant she rarely had the time or the privacy to take a drag. While she still took a puff or two late at night when the stress peaked, she looked infinitely healthier and more vibrant than the broken, exhausted woman Vaughn had first met. "Well, the compliment doesn't matter," Emily said, dropping her portfolio onto the small dining table and practically vibrating with excitement. "Because today is the day, Vaughn. I've officially secured and consolidated all of our liquid cash." Vaughn's ears perked up instantly. He walked over to the table, looking forward to the breakdown. "Talk to me." Emily opened her laptop. "First, the Vanguard contract," Emily began, pulling up a summarized PDF. "We've been over the terms, but it's officially locked. It's a guaranteed $750,000 base salary for a 1-year exclusivity contract. They provide your entire wardrobe for all public appearances, which saves us a fortune in styling fees. They take a 15% cut of any co-branded merchandise we design together. And, most importantly, we retain 100% creative control over your music." Vaughn nodded, tracing the edge of the table. "Right, and the money?" "They wired the signing bonus advance this morning," Emily grinned, tapping a key. "That's $150,000 directly into our new corporate holding account." Vaughn's mouth fell open slightly, but he kept quiet, eager to hear the fun part. "But that's just the corporate money," Emily continued, her eyes shining as she pulled up the back-end analytics dashboards for Musify and Inktube. "Most of our actual capital comes from the streams." She turned the laptop so Vaughn could see the staggering graphs. "The lyric video for Masquerade generated 350,000 streams," Emily recited, "which is solid for a static video. But the official music video, it is still the #1 trending music video globally as of this morning. It has racked up 45 million views in just a few weeks." Vaughn stared at the number, 45 million. It was difficult to even comprehend that many human beings watching him perform. "And across all audio platforms, Mango, Musify, Tidal, the track itself just crossed 95 million streams," Emily finished, leaning back in her chair. Vaughn knew the data was climbing, but hearing the consolidated numbers out loud was deeply validating. He was incredibly proud of what they had built. So, after calculating the standard payout rates per stream across the different platforms, factoring in the revenue from the 3 club shows we did last month, adding the Vanguard Advance and, Emily paused, offering a wry smile. After taking my standard cut and setting aside the mandatory state and federal tax reserves, Emily hit the enter key on her calculator app. A single bold number flashed on the screen. Our finalized liquid operational capital is $1.2 million, Emily announced. When Vaughn heard the money, he practically went bonkers. He let out a loud, disbelieving laugh, running both hands through his hair. $1 million, Vaughn breathed. That is literally more than the prize money they offered on Project Star. Yep, Emily laughed, closing the laptop with a sharp snap. You're a big shot now, Vaughn. And all of this is liquid cash. I'll be transferring it into our primary business account by the end of the day. Chapter 90. Back in Miami. Vaughn paced the small living room, the adrenaline surging through his veins, the suffocating weight of his past debts, the fear of failing, the anxiety of being an independent artist. It all temporarily evaporated under the weight of that number. All right, Vaughn said, stopping his pacing and looking at her. Then it's time to execute the next phase, the LLC plan. I'm ready, Emily nodded, pulling a notepad from her portfolio. We need to file the articles of incorporation in New York. We need to officially register Absolute Records as your independent label. That will give us the legal shield we need to operate without Circle Media breathing down our necks. Good, Vaughn agreed. Because once the label is established, I need to record an album, a full 10-track debut studio album, and I need it done before Halloween. Emily blinked, her pen stopping halfway across the page. Wow. Okay, that is an aggressive timeline, Vaughn. You won't go on a break? Of course, Vaughn said immediately. I'd like us to travel to Miami first. I want to meet my family there. It's been too long, and I have some promises to keep. Plus, after the war we just fought with Julian and Diana, it's a nice time to cool off and have a deserved break before we lock ourselves in a vocal booth. Emily thought about it, tapping her pen against her chin. The wheels in her head were already turning, calculating the logistics. Well, Emily said slowly, we could actually make the album over there. Patch mentioned once that he knows a massive high-end commercial studio in South Beach that he used to work out of. The rates are better than Manhattan, the weather is better, and honestly getting out of Diana Sterling's immediate territory while we record is a massive advantage. You could even rent a better place to stay down there. Vaughn wasn't too sure about her suggestion. He knew $1.2 million was a lot of money, but he also knew exactly how fast it could vanish. He had a $300K debt to pay off immediately. He wanted to secure Naomi's college tuition and paying for elite studio time. Patch's producer fees and high-end mixing and mastering would drain their capital rapidly. Well, Vaughn said, keeping his financial anxieties hidden behind a calm smile. Let's just travel first. Book the flights for tomorrow. We'll see how the vibe is when we land. Flights to Miami for tomorrow morning. You got it, boss. Emily smiled, reaching down to grab Loki. She picked up the void links, scratching her gently behind the ears and earning a contented purr. Meanwhile, Vaughn stood by the window, looking out at the noisy Queens Street below. His thoughts were entirely consumed by the money and what his visit to Miami would mean. The dense, humid air of Miami hit Vaughn the second he stepped out of the air-conditioned terminal at the airport. It was a stark contrast to the concrete chill of New York, but to Vaughn, it felt exactly like home. He pulled the hood of his black Vanguard jacket up, adjusted his dark sunglasses, and slipped a black medical face mask over his nose and mouth. Beside him, Emily tapped away on her phone, seamlessly coordinating their rental SUV. You look incredibly suspicious, you know that? Emily said, side-eyeing his outfit as they loaded their bags into the trunk. I'm just trying to walk around my old campus without causing a riot, Vaughn chuckled, sliding into the passenger seat. They drove straight to the University of Miami. Vaughn wanted to walk the sun-drenched courtyards where he used to study psychology before Project Star derailed his life. For the first 20 minutes, the disguise worked perfectly. They blended right into the background of the busy college campus, but the Florida afternoon sun was unforgiving. As they walked across the sprawling green lawns, the heat and humidity began to take their toll. Okay, I'm fucking melting, Emily complained, fanning her face with her hand. She pointed toward a brightly colored refreshment stall near the student union. If I don't get a freezing cold lemonade right now, I'm going to pass out on this grass. Vaughn wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. Yeah, I'm completely parched too. Let's hit the stall. They walked up to the counter, and Emily quickly ordered 2 large iced lemonades. When the drinks arrived, Vaughn grabbed his plastic cup, completely forgetting the golden rule of going incognito in public. He pulled his black mask down to his chin to take a long, refreshing sip through the straw. "Wait," the girl working the stall whispered. She stopped wiping the counter and stared. She looked at his exposed jawline, up at the striking violet eyes just visible over the rim of his shades, and then down at the heavy Vanguard nightshade jacket he was wearing, the exact piece of clothing that had sold out globally the day before. "Oh my God," she gasped, her voice piercing the ambient chatter of the courtyard. "Are you Von Varley?" Vaughn froze mid-sip. He offered a polite, panicked smile and put a finger to his lips, but it was far too late. "It's Von Varley!" a guy at the next table shouted, dropping his textbook on the concrete. Within 30 seconds, the quiet courtyard dissolved into absolute pandemonium. Dozens of students rushed over, pulling out their phones, screaming his name, and completely boxing him and Emily in against the lemonade stall. "Sign my notebook, please." "Vaughn, the video was insane. Are you dropping an album?" Vaughn couldn't help but laugh. Caught completely off guard by the sheer intensity of his newfound fame, he took a Sharpie from a shaking freshman and started signing whatever was pushed into his hands. Emily tried to play crowd control, but there were simply too many people. They were trapped. "All right, everyone, let's settle down and give them some breathing room," a calm, highly authoritative voice called out over the noise. A tall, sharply dressed young man in a tailored navy suit and round glasses stepped through the crowd. It was Zach, and he carried a different and undeniable air of authority. The students instantly parted for him, murmuring in recognition as he walked through. "Hey, Zach," one of the students greeted respectfully, taking a step back to clear the path. Zach offered the crowd a polite, winning smile. "Thank you, guys. I apologize for ruining the fun, but I really need to borrow my friend here for a second. We're running late for a meeting." Because of the sheer respect Zach commanded on campus, the students actually listened. They backed off just enough to allow Zach to guide Vaughn and Emily out of the mob. They quickly walked across the lawn and slipped into Zach's parked sedan. Zach hit the gas, pulling out of the campus and onto the main road. Vaughn pulled his mask all the way off, catching his breath and laughing out loud. "Wow. What just happened back there? They parted like the Red Sea for you. Since when do you run this campus?" Zach smirked, adjusting his rearview mirror. "Well, when you aren't around dropping viral music videos, some of us actually study. I just wrapped up law school, stepped down as the president of the Student Bar Association, and," he paused for dramatic effect, "I'm officially graduating at the very top of my class. Best graduating student, baby." "Valedictorian?" Vaughn grinned, playfully punching Zach's shoulder. "Look at you, man. You actually did it." "We both did," Zach corrected him, glancing at Vaughn's Vanguard jacket with a proud smile. "Now what's this I hear on the phone about you needing a lawyer?" Chapter 91. Lawyer on board. Emily leaned forward from the back seat, resting her arms on the headrests. Since Vaughn insists on starting an independent record label instead of taking a massive corporate deal, we need an entire legal framework. Contracts, copyright filing, trademarking the label name, negotiating distribution. Have you worked at an entertainment firm before? "Nope," Zach said cheerfully, taking a right turn. "I just graduated, remember?" Emily sighed and looked over at Vaughn. "We'll need someone with proper litigation experience." "No, he's seriously good." Vaughn was quick to vouch for him. "He kept me out of jail and handled a copyright issue without even being a lawyer yet, and most importantly, he's very close to me. So I trust him." Emily looked at the back of Zach's head, analyzing him. She knew loyalty was a rare commodity in this business. If Vaughn trusted him this much, there had to be a reason. "Fine, but I'm going to hold you to that, Zach." "I welcome the challenge," Zach grinned. "So, where are we heading first? The state office to file the LLC?" "No, we need to switch cars," Vaughn replied. "We're taking our rented SUV. You can still drive, though. We're picking up my sister first." They drove out of the sun-drenched areas of Coral Gables and headed toward the more working-class neighborhoods of Miami. Vaughn had been sending Naomi money ever since he got his first paycheck, ensuring she didn't have to go back working in that place. They had spoken on the phone a few times, but hearing her voice over a phone didn't mean nearly as much as seeing her face to face. Zach pulled the black SUV up to a modest, slightly run-down apartment complex. Vaughn pulled his mask up and jogged up the concrete stairs to the second floor, Emily right behind him. He stood in front of the door with the number 2B on it. He took a deep breath and knocked. A moment later, the deadbolt clicked. The door opened, revealing Naomi. She was wearing an oversized, paint-stained t-shirt, her hair tied up in a messy bun. She looked incredibly tired, holding a sketchbook against her chest. She stared at the masked figures in confusion for a split second. Then, Vaughn pulled his sunglasses down and lowered his mask. Naomi gasped and the sketchbook slipped from her fingers. "Vaughn? Hey, Nana." Vaughn smiled softly, and tears instantly flooded Naomi's eyes. She threw herself forward, wrapping her arms around his neck in a crushing hug. Vaughn held her tight, burying her face in his shoulder. "I can't believe you're here," Naomi cried, refusing to let go. "I saw everything. You did it." "We did it," Vaughn whispered back, pulling away just enough to look at her. "Now go put some shoes on. We have someone to visit." She gave him a light peck on his forehead before welcoming them inside and hurrying to dress up. 20 minutes later, Naomi was sitting in the back of the spacious SUV next to Emily. "All right," Vaughn said from the passenger seat, turning around to face her. "I told you I was coming back to fix things. We're going to see Uncle Ken right now to clear the debt." Naomi visibly tensed at the name. She bit her lip. "Vaughn, you shouldn't go there. You don't know what you're walking into." "I know exactly what I'm walking into," Vaughn said calmly. "He claims Dad owed him 300 grand. He took the house, and he threatened you for the interest. I have the money now, Naomi. I'm ending it today." Zach, who had been listening quietly while navigating the Miami traffic, suddenly frowned. He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel. "Hold on a second," Zach interrupted, glancing at Vaughn. 300,000? To your Uncle Ken? "Yeah," Vaughn nodded, the anger bubbling up in his chest just thinking about it. "My dad had a gambling problem. He borrowed from loan sharks, and Uncle Ken supposedly covered some of it, or took on the debt. When the accident happened, Ken produced a stack of IOUs signed by my dad. He kicked us out and claimed the house as collateral, plus the 300 grand. Zach let out an incredulous laugh. He shook his head, looking over at Vaughn. "You see? This is exactly why you need me on the payroll, Vaughn," Zach said. "Why on earth would you even consider settling a debt dispute of that magnitude without a lawyer?" "Because it's a blood debt, I guess," Vaughn tried to argue. "He threatened to send people after Naomi if we missed the interest payments. I just want him out of our lives." "Whatever," Zach scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "You're a celebrity now, Vaughn. You don't just hand over $300,000 in liquid cash to an extortionist because he has a few pieces of paper. Listen to me very carefully. Was your uncle a licensed lender?" "No," Naomi answered quietly from the back. "He ran a used car lot, but mostly he just hustled." "Exactly," Zach smiled, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of a legal loophole. "In the state of Florida, the statute of frauds requires certain contracts to be in writing to be enforceable, particularly those assuming the debt of another. Furthermore, if he was charging you weekly interest without a lending license, that's not a loan, Vaughn. That's usury. It's illegal." Vaughn blinked, staring at Zach. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying we aren't giving that vulture 300 grand, Zach declared, turning the steering wheel sharply to merge onto the highway. "We are going to walk in there, and I am going to legally terrify him. We'll settle for pennies on the dollar just to get him to sign a non-disclosure agreement so he can't go to the tabloids about your family history. Let the lawyer work." Uncle Ken lived in a tacky, overly ostentatious McMansion in a gated community in North Miami. He hadn't contacted Naomi once since Vaughn went on reality TV, content to just collect his weekly interest checks. Zach parked the SUV in the driveway. Vaughn pulled his mask up, and the four of them walked up to the massive double doors. Chapter 92. Wasted Ken. A moment after ringing the doorbell, the door swung open. Uncle Ken stood there in a silk bathrobe, holding a half-empty glass of scotch. He was a balding, heavy-set man with a permanent scowl that instantly morphed into a wide-eyed smile the second he recognized his nephew. "Vaughn, my boy!" Ken cheered, almost spilling his drink. "I saw the news, top of the charts. I told everyone at the club, that's my nephew. Come in, come in. I always knew you had the talent to make it big." Vaughn didn't move an inch. "We aren't staying. We're here to settle the debt." Ken's smile faltered slightly, his eyes darting to Emily, Naomi, and finally resting on the figure of Zach. The fake warmth evaporated, replaced by the greedy calculation of a hustler. "Right, the debt," Ken sighed, adopting a faux sympathetic tone. "It's a tragedy what your father left you with. With the principal, the missed interest, and the late fees you owe me 310,000, Vaughn. But since you're family and you're doing so well, I'll keep it at a flat 300. Cashier's check is fine. Zach stepped forward, physically placing himself between Vaughn and the doorway. He slid a thick manila folder out from under his arm. Good afternoon, Ken. I am Zachary Tuna, head of legal for Absolute Records, and my client will not be paying you $300,000. Ken was left wondering for a second, but he got into character, sneering and puffing his chest out. Listen here, Suit. I have IOUs signed by his father. If he doesn't pay, I'll take him to court. Or better yet, I'll go to the tabloids right now and tell them how the great Von Varley is a deadbeat who steals from his own family. Actually, Zach smiled smoothly, opening the folder. He'll survive it just fine. You, on the other hand, will be looking at federal charges. The blood drained from Ken's face. What are you talking about? I did a little digging on the drive over, Zach lied flawlessly, tapping the blank papers in his folder. You are operating as an unlicensed money transmitter. The interest you've been forcing Naomi to pay exceeds 45% annually. Under Florida usury laws, anything over 18% is a third-degree felony. Furthermore, the IOUs you hold are legally unenforceable without proof of actual fund transfer. In short, you've been extorting orphans. Ken swallowed hard, the glass of scotch trembling in his hand. He looked at Vaughn, expecting mercy, but Vaughn just stared back with indifference. So, Zach continued, pulling a pen from his jacket, here is the deal. We are offering a one-time, final settlement of $80,000 to completely buy out this fabricated debt. In exchange, you will sign this release of claims and a strict non-disclosure agreement. If you protest, or if you ever breathe a word of this to the press, I will personally hand this folder to the district attorney, and you will spend the next 5 years in a state penitentiary. Defeated and outplayed, Ken snatched the pen. He furiously scribbled his signature on the legal documents, his face flushed with humiliating rage. Emily handed him a certified check for $80,000, pocketing the signed contracts. Ken looked down at the check, fuming. He looked back up at Vaughn, trying to salvage whatever scrap of dignity he had left. Is this how you treat your own blood? Ken spat bitterly. After everything I did for you, you're a cold-hearted punk, Vaughn. At least let me get a picture with you for my photogram. Show people we're good. Vaughn reached up, slowly pulling down his sunglasses so his uncle could see the absolute disgust in his violet eyes. Is this how you treat your own blood? Ken spat bitterly. After everything I did for you? You're a cold-hearted punk, Vaughn. At least let me get a picture with you for my photogram. Show people we're good. Vaughn didn't say a word. He simply reached up, pulled off his dark sunglasses and stepped right up next to his uncle. Ken was momentarily surprised by the silent compliance, but his greedy instincts quickly took over. He whipped out his smartphone, threw a heavy arm around Vaughn's shoulder and snapped a quick selfie, making sure the Vanguard jacket was clearly in frame. Without missing a beat, his thumbs started tapping away rapidly on the screen. What are you using it for? Vaughn asked casually, seeing how quickly he was acting. Haha, you'll see, Ken chuckled with a triumphant grin spreading across his face. He hit the share button, looking thoroughly pleased with himself. He laughed like he had just outsmarted them, securing the ultimate marketing tool to boost his used car business off his superstar nephew's back. A moment later, Emily's phone chimed with an alert. She glanced at her screen, and a wide smirk broke through her professional facade. She turned her phone around to show Zach the notification. He really made the post, Emily laughed. Vaughn let out a relaxed laugh as well, shaking his head at his uncle's predictable greed. It was a trap Zach had carefully laid out in the SUV on the ride over. Zach knew Ken's massive ego wouldn't let Vaughn leave without trying to squeeze out some social media clout to save face. They just needed him to take the bait on his own. Zach stepped forward. Excuse me, Ken. Did you just publicly post that photo to promote your dealership? Ken frowned in annoyance. So what? He's my blood. It's good for business. Zach sighed dramatically, shaking his head. He tapped the freshly signed documents in Emily's hand. Section 4, Paragraph 2 of the strict non-disclosure agreement you signed exactly 2 minutes ago explicitly prohibits the use of Von Varley's name, image, or likeness for any public association, social media clout, or commercial gain. Ken blinked, the words slowly registering in his scotch-addled brain. Wait, what? The stipulated penalty for a direct, immediate breach of this contract, Zach continued, is the immediate forfeiture of all settlement funds. Liquidated damages. Before Ken could even process the legal jargon, Zach casually reached out and plucked the $80,000 certified check right out of Ken's loose, trembling fingers. You can't do that, Ken sputtered, panic rising in his chest as he reached for the paper. Give that back. I can, and I just did, Zach said smoothly, tucking the check safely into his suit pocket. If you'd like to contest it, we can go to civil court, but remember, the moment we do, the district attorney gets a phone call about your illegal lending practices. Vaughn stepped back, slipping his dark sunglasses back over his eyes. You should really read what you sign, Ken, Vaughn said with pity too. Dad made that mistake, and thanks to my buddy Zach, I don't. Ken stood frozen in the doorway of his McMansion, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. His brain simply couldn't comprehend how he had gone from demanding $300,000 to settling for $80 to being left with absolutely zero in the span of 5 minutes. Without another word, Vaughn turned and walked down the driveway with his sister, leaving his uncle ruined, outsmarted, and completely speechless in the Florida heat. Chapter 93. Absolute HQ. The heavy doors of the SUV slammed shut, sealing them inside the air-conditioned cabin. For a full 3 seconds, nobody said a word. I can't believe he actually posted it, Zach smirked and broke the silence. Vaughn was even more shocked himself. He looked at the $80,000 cashier's check that was now in his hands. Dude, you just saved me $300,000 in 5 minutes, Vaughn said, shaking his head in disbelief. But come on, man, it can't be that easy. Are you sure he won't retaliate? It's that easy, Zach laughed. He'll probably call some strip mall lawyer by tomorrow morning to try and fight it. But once his guy does the proper research, he'll realize Ken has zero chance. You are officially unburdened, my friend. Vaughn smiled, feeling a weight lift off his chest. The ghost of his family's financial ruin was finally gone. He turned around in his seat to look at Emily and Naomi in the back. So, Vaughn said, rubbing his hands together. What's next, Em? Emily, who had already transitioned back into full executive mode, was tapping away on her tablet. Actually, Emily said, looking up, the broker for the property I told you about just texted me. He said the current tenants cleared out yesterday and the cleaning crew just finished. We can go see it right now. Zach's ears perked up. He put the SUV in drive and pulled out of the gated community. Property? You rented a place? So you're actually planning on settling here in Miami? Vaughn nodded, looking out the window at the familiar palm trees. Yep, New York helped me a lot. It was exactly what we needed to launch, but I want to settle down now, and what better place to do that than home? Vaughn paused, shooting a knowing look at his new lawyer. Plus, we can't stand those New York state taxes. We're keeping our LLC registered in Florida. We're far better off here. Zach chuckled, impressed by the financial strategy. Smart move, dog. Dodging the state income tax on a top 3 Billboard hit is going to save you enough money to buy a boat. So, what's the plan for the music? I'm working on an album, Vaughn said simply. A full 10-track debut studio album. We're going to build it right here in Miami. I trust you to cook, Zach grinned, tapping the GPS screen on the dashboard. So, where is this house you guys are talking about? Just give me the address. Emily read off an address that made Zach's eyebrows shoot straight up to his hairline. It wasn't in the suburbs, and it certainly wasn't an apartment complex. It was located on Venetian Islands, one of the most exclusive, hyper-expensive, man-made islands in South Beach, home to millionaires, celebrities, and big athletes. You guys rented a house on Venetian Islands? Zach asked with a broken voice. Those places go for like $30,000 a month. We negotiated it down to 25, Emily corrected smoothly with a wink. 30 minutes later, the black SUV crossed the guarded causeway and pulled onto the private island. The streets were pristine, lined with towering, manicured hedges that hid massive architectural masterpieces from the public eye. Zach pulled into a long, circular driveway paved with imported stone. At the end of the driveway sat the house. It was a sprawling, ultra-modern, 2-story mansion made almost entirely of white concrete and floor-to-ceiling tinted glass. It looked less like a house and more like a high-end art gallery. A sharply dressed real estate broker was waiting for them by the massive, solid oak front doors. He unlocked the house and gave them the grand tour. The moment Vaughn stepped inside, he felt like he had entered a different reality. The ceilings were at least 20 feet high. The entire back wall of the living room was made of sliding glass panels that completely opened up to a massive outdoor patio. Beyond the patio was an infinity-edge swimming pool that seemed to spill directly into the sparkling blue waters of Biscayne Bay. The house came fully furnished, exactly to Emily's specifications. There were sleek, low-profile Italian leather sofas, abstract art on the walls, and a massive, open-concept kitchen with matte black marble countertops. It has 5 bedrooms, all with en suite bathrooms, Emily explained as they walked through the echoing halls. There's a private gym in the basement, a home theater, and most importantly, she pointed toward a set of soundproofed double doors near the back of the house. It's located exactly 10 minutes away from the commercial studio where we'll be locking in, Emily finished. It makes the logistics perfect. When Patch flies down next week with his gear, he can stay in one of the guest suites, and we can commute to the studio without hitting any major traffic. Vaughn barely heard her. He was too busy walking out onto the back patio, standing by the edge of the infinity pool and looking out at the Miami skyline across the water. The sea breeze ruffled his hair. He thought back to the cramped apartment he would later move into after dropping out of school. The future was going so far apart, and he was really living it. Now, he was standing in a $25,000 a month mansion, completely debt-free, with over $1 million sitting in his corporate bank account. He was really stepping up in life. The Independent King title wasn't just a gimmick anymore, it was really his reality. A soft, trilling sound broke his concentration. Down by his feet, Loki trotted out onto the patio. The Void Lynx had been silently sleeping on the floorboards of the SUV for the entire chaotic afternoon. Now, she stretched her dark, shadowy limbs in the warm Florida sun, her violet eyes scanning the massive pool area with clear approval. "Looks like the cat approves of the real estate," Zach laughed, walking up behind him with a bottle of water he had grabbed from the massive smart fridge. They spent the next hour claiming their respective rooms. Vaughn naturally took the sprawling master suite on the top floor, which featured its own private balcony and a massive walk-in closet. Emily claimed the largest guest suite down the hall, already transforming the attached sitting area into her Vanguard home office. Zach, who was technically just visiting, immediately laid claim to a room with a view overlooking the driveway. Vaughn walked down the hall to the final sunlit bedroom where Naomi was standing by the window. She was looking out at the private dock and the ocean, her hands resting on the glass. She looked completely overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the luxury. Vaughn leaned against the doorframe, watching her for a moment before speaking. "Unfortunately, Nana," Vaughn said, keeping his voice carefully neutral, "I have some bad news. You can't stay with us." Naomi turned around, her eyes widening in surprise. She looked around the massive, empty room, clearly confused. She hadn't expected to live here permanently, but the sudden dismissal stung. "Oh," Naomi said quietly, looking down at her shoes. "Well, I have no problems with that, Vaughn. I know you guys are going to be super busy with the album, and I don't want to be in the way. I can go back to my apartment." Vaughn couldn't hold the straight face anymore. He let out a loud laugh, pushing off the doorframe and walking into the room. "You aren't going back to that rundown apartment, Naomi," Vaughn smiled, shaking his head. "You can't stay with us because we can only accommodate you for a few weeks. You're leaving." He reached into the inner pocket of his Vanguard jacket and pulled out a crisp, heavy envelope bearing a gold-embossed seal. He held it out to her. "You're traveling to California by the end of August," Vaughn explained softly as she hesitantly took the envelope. "I made a few calls." Emily leveraged some of the Vanguard corporate connections to bypass the standard wait lists, and I covered the rest. Naomi looked down at the envelope. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal and pulled out the paper inside. She read the bold header, and her breath completely hitched in her throat. "California Institute of the Arts, official letter of admission." "CalArts," Naomi whispered, her voice cracking. It was arguably the most prestigious, elite art school in the entire country. It was the place she had dreamed of going before the car accident had shattered their lives. "They are open to taking you in for the fall semester," Vaughn said, stepping closer. "Everything has been covered. Your tuition, your housing, your art supplies. Everything is paid in full. You're going to LA, Nana." Naomi stared at the letter for a long, silent moment. A single tear slipped down her cheek, hitting the expensive parchment paper. Then another. And another. Vaughn hadn't forgotten his promise. Through the reality TV drama, the internet wars, the debt collectors, and the sudden fame, he had kept the one promise that mattered most. She let out a choked sob, dropping the letter onto the bed, and threw her arms around him. Vaughn hugged her back tightly, resting his chin on her head as she cried into his chest, finally letting go of years of buried dreams. Chapter 94. Car shopping. After the emotional high of Naomi's acceptance letter, the reality of their sudden relocation finally set in. The Venetian Islands mansion was fully furnished, but their suitcases were mostly packed with heavy New York streetwear. So, they piled back into their rented SUV and hit the city. It was their first true taste of wealth since a long time. They hit a few high-end boutiques in the design district, where Vaughn swiped his new Absolute Records corporate card for fresh clothes, sunglasses, and sneakers without even glancing at the price tags. From there, they raided a luxury grocery store, filling the back of the SUV with enough premium snacks, organic fruit, and drinks to survive them months. That night was the best Vaughn had experienced in years. They gathered in the open-concept living room, boxes of insanely expensive seafood takeout spread across the glass coffee table, and they all watched a movie together with loads of laughter. The next morning, as the sun began pouring into his room through the massive windows, Vaughn woke up slowly from his bed. He laid there for a moment, listening to the peace and quiet he was now accustomed to. He relished it, before getting up to have a steaming shower and changed into some of the fresh clothes he bought the night before, a white t-shirt and loose, comfortable designer sweatpants. When he walked downstairs, the house was already alive. Naomi was out on the back patio, sitting by the edge of the infinity pool with her sketchbook open, humming softly to herself as she drew the Miami skyline. Loki was curled up into a dark, furry ball on the sun-warmed concrete right next to her, soaking up the heat. Emily was sitting at the massive marble kitchen island, a fresh cup of coffee in one hand and her laptop open in front of her. She was rapidly scrolling through spreadsheets. "You're spending a lot of money very quickly, Vaughn," Emily noted without looking up as he walked into the kitchen and grabbed a bottle of cold water from the smart fridge. "And I've already taken aside the amount we'll be needing for your album." Vaughn bent against the counter and took a long sip of water. "Are we broke?" "Far from it," Emily smirked, finally looking up and turning her laptop screen toward him. "That's the beauty of owning your masters. You are entirely independent." She pointed to the dashboard. The green arrows were pointing straight up. "Even with all these expenses, Masquerade is currently acting as a massive cash cow. The song is holding incredibly strong at number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. It's on every major pop and R&B playlist across all streaming platforms. And the official music video is now pulling in over 3 million views a day. The algorithm absolutely loves it." Vaughn looked at the staggering numbers. He had created a self-sustaining hype machine. "Because you didn't sign a 360 deal," Emily continued, her eyes gleaming with pride. "No one is taking an 80% cut of your royalties. So, yes, you are dropping hundreds of thousands of dollars right now, but based on the current streaming data, we are projected to make millions in the coming months. You're expected to receive a massive royalty payout by the end of August that will more than refill our coffers." "So, I can afford to make one more major purchase today?" Vaughn asked, a sly smile creeping onto his face. Emily sighed. "What are you buying now?" "Transportation," Vaughn said. He turned his head toward the living room, where Zach was laying out on one of the sofas, mindlessly scrolling through his phone. "Zach, get dressed. We have an errand to run." Zach looked up and raised an eyebrow. "An errand?" "Yes, just call the Uber," Vaughn responded with a grin. 45 minutes later, a black Suburban dropped them off in front of a high-end exotic car dealership in Coral Gables. The showroom floor was a playground of Ferraris, Porsches, customized Range Rovers, and Bentley. Zach stepped out of the Uber, adjusting his suit jacket, and let out a low whistle. "Okay, I get it. The top 3 Billboard star needs a ride to match the island house. You looking for a sports car to flex in? Let's just see what they have," Vaughn said, putting his dark sunglasses on as they walked through the automatic sliding doors. A well-dressed salesman with a perfectly trimmed beard immediately spotted them. His eyes darted from Vaughn's recognizable violet eyes down to his limited edition Vanguard sneakers, and instantly smelled a massive commission. "Gentlemen," the salesman approached with a $1 million smile, extending a hand. "I'm Marcus. Welcome to Ocean Drive Exotics. What kind of statement are we looking to make today?" "We're just browsing for a minute," Vaughn replied politely, walking past Marcus to wander the floor. He stopped in front of a breathtaking, completely customized Rolls-Royce Phantom. It looked like a yacht meant for the asphalt. Out of pure curiosity, Vaughn ran a hand over the polished hood and looked over his shoulder. "How much for this one?" Marcus smiled warmly. "Ah, excellent taste, sir. That specific Phantom has the bespoke Starlight headliner and armored paneling. It's listed at $580,000. Vaughn kept his face entirely neutral, but internally, he flinched. $500,000 for a single car. Even with all the money rolling in, dropping half his liquid capital on one vehicle would be financial suicide. It was a humbling reality check. He was a king now, sure, but the empire was still under construction. He had a long way to go before he could casually point at a Rolls-Royce. "A bit too flashy for my daily commute," Vaughn said smoothly, stepping away from the Phantom. "I need a mobile office. Something with privacy and enough space for my management to comfortably work while we head to the studio." Marcus nodded, pivoting seamlessly. "Understood." Right this way, sir. He led them to the back of the showroom, where a massive, fully blacked-out Cadillac Escalade ESV Platinum sat elevated on a display platform. Matte black paint, window tints, and heavy black rims. It was imposing, luxurious, and undeniably boss-level. Extended wheelbase, Marcus pitched. The interior features custom captain's chairs with massage functions, folding tray tables for laptops, a built-in Wi-Fi hotspot, and a partition between the driver and the rear cabin for absolute privacy. It is the ultimate executive transport. Priced at $165,000. Vaughn looked at the massive vehicle. It was a fortress on wheels. I like it. He then turned around and scanned the floor again. He casually pointed to a sleek, sophisticated silver Mercedes-Benz AMG E53 sedan parked a few yards away. How much is the Mercedes? The AMG E53? A beautiful daily driver, $85,000. I'll take the Escalade, Vaughn said. He then pointed to the silver sedan. And I'll take the Mercedes too. Zach froze. He slowly turned his head to look at Vaughn, his jaw practically hitting the polished showroom floor. Wait, hold up. Did you just say two? Vaughn, you don't need two cars. I know, Vaughn smiled, walking over to the Mercedes and patting the hood. The Escalade is my car. This one is yours. Zach stared at him, completely speechless. You're buying me a Benz? Bro, what are you talking about? Vaughn waved it aside with a grin. Consider this a sign-on bonus for everything you've done. You kept me out of jail and saved me $300,000 yesterday. It's the least I can do. Not a big deal? Zach smiled wryly. Seriously, thank you so much, bro. Excellent choices, gentlemen, Marcus beamed, pulling a calculator from his suit pocket. So, the Escalade at $165 and the Mercedes at $85, that brings us to $250,000 before taxes and our standard dealership prep fees. Hold on, Zach interrupted. Nobody is paying sticker price, Marcus. Marcus chuckled nervously. Well, sir, these are premium, highly sought-after vehicles, and we are offering a direct corporate cash wire transfer. You're moving $250,000 of inventory off your floor in the next 10 minutes, but we aren't paying your inflated dealer prep fees, and we aren't paying $215,000, taxes included, or we call our Uber back and go to the dealership in South Beach. Marcus blinked at the demand. He looked at Vaughn, expecting the young star to override his friend, but Vaughn just stood there with his arms crossed, an amused smirk on his face, letting his lawyer work. 225, Marcus countered weakly. I have a manager I have to answer to. 220, Zach said with an extended hand. Marcus sighed in defeat, but a smile broke through anyway. He shook Zach's hand. 220. You drive a hard bargain, counselor. If you'll follow me to my office, we can get the titles and registration sorted right now. They sat down in the plush leather chairs inside the glass-walled office. Marcus pulled up the documents on his monitors, his fingers flying across the keyboard. All right, Mr. Varley, the wire transfer from Absolute Records is pending approval. Everything looks fantastic, Marcus said smoothly. I just need a copy of your valid driver's license for the title, registration, and the dealership's insurance release forms, and you guys can drive them off the lot. Vaughn leaned back in his chair. He didn't reach for his wallet. Instead, he just stared blankly at Marcus. I don't have a license. Marcus paused his typing. Excuse me, you mean you don't have it on you? I can accept a passport for the primary ID, but we do need a driver's license on file for the insurance. No, I mean I literally do not have a driver's license, Vaughn clarified, taking his sunglasses off. I can't drive. Zach, who had been sitting in his chair feeling like really good after that negotiation, suddenly snapped his head toward Vaughn. Wait, what? You don't know how to drive? When exactly was I supposed to learn? Vaughn asked with a raised eyebrow. I never owned a vehicle before now, unless my gaming experience counts. Zach just stared at him for 3 seconds before bursting into laughter. He slid his own driver's license across the desk to Marcus. Put both titles under the Absolute Records LLC. I'll drive the Escalade, and you guys can have one of your lot porters deliver my Mercedes this afternoon. Chapter 95. Don't unlock this yet. The rain began as a gentle mist, but quickly escalated into a steady downpour, splattering softly against the lonely streets of Lincoln Road. It was a late hour, and the usual crowd of tourists had long since retreated. On a wooden bench near the fountain, 2 figures sat exposed to the elements. One was a man hunched over, his clothes ragged and soaked and his head bent low in defeat. the other was Vaughn. The rain plastered his black hair to his forehead, giving him a raw, cinematic look. He ignored the water dripping down his neck. He was deeply absorbed in his craft, his fingers dancing over the wet strings of his guitar. But the weather was merely a backdrop. The real storm was in the melody he was playing, a melancholic, hopeful tune that cut through the sound of the rain. "You're gonna come tilde home. You're gonna tilde come tilde home." Vaughn's voice, now raspy from hours of singing, carried a weight it hadn't possessed before. "If you want to come home, Tilda, then you gotta come home, Tilda." He let the final chord fade into the sound of the rain. The man on the bench slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red, washed clean by the rain and tears. He stood up stiffly and walked toward Vaughn. "Sir," the man's rough voice cracked. "Your song, it really touched me." He wiped his nose with a dirty sleeve. "I ran away from my folks 6 months ago, just packed up and left because I was too proud to admit I messed up. I've been sleeping out here, thinking about going back every day, but the shame, it was too much." He looked at Vaughn, his eyes pleading. "Hearing that it brought back memories I thought I killed. It gave me back something I lost. Thank you." He bent down, intending to kneel on the wet pavement, careful not to touch Vaughn with his grimy hands. Suddenly, he felt warmth envelop him. Vaughn had pulled off his own jacket and draped it over the man's shivering shoulders. Before the man could react, Vaughn pulled him into a firm hug, ignoring the smell and the dirt. "Sorry, bud," Vaughn said softly, patting the man's back. "I understand there's a hard life out there, and we all make mistakes. But trust me, every mistake can be fixed. It's all a matter of you." Vaughn pulled back, gripping the man's shoulders. He pointed a finger at the man's chest. "Now, man up. Go back to your family if you want to. They'll be waiting for you. Trust me." Tears welled up in the man's eyes again. He pulled Vaughn into a tighter hug, sobbing openly now. Thank you. I won't forget you. I'm going back, tonight." Vaughn ignored the snot on his shoulder. He patted the man one last time as they broke the embrace. "Best of luck, pal." The man punched his chest in a silent salute. Vaughn watched him turn and walk away, his step lighter, heading toward the bus station. Vaughn checked his phone. 11:39 p.m. "That was a close one," he whispered. "Ding. Congratulations. You've gained a loyal fan. Current fans, 50. Acquire 50 loyal fans. 50 50ths. Quest objectives completed." Vaughn grinned from ear to ear. If not for the bone-chilling cold, he would have jumped up and punched the air. He was mere minutes away from failing the quest, but his decision to pull an all-nighter had paid off. As a cherry on top, he had genuinely changed someone's life. It filled him with a fulfillment that rivaled the system rewards. Crail. Boom. A crack of thunder shook the sky. The rain intensified, turning from a drizzle into a deluge. "Right," Vaughn muttered, grabbing his guitar case. "Time to go." He broke into a run, sprinting through the empty streets as the storm chased him home. Vaughn burst into the dorm room, dripping wet. Zach was still awake, hunched over his laptop at his desk. "Of course," Vaughn muttered. The guy never slept. Zach took off his headphones immediately as the lights flickered on. He spun around, his eyes widening. "You're back," Zach said, sounding relieved. "I was worried sick about you. It's pouring out there." Vaughn grabbed a towel from his rack and started drying his hair aggressively. "Yeah, I saw your missed calls. I was busking." "At this time?" Zach raised an eyebrow. "Yup, felt like staying longer. The acoustics in the rain are different." Vaughn shivered, but the cold felt good. It felt like victory. Zach turned back to his laptop, adjusting his glasses. "I advise you not to stay out so late in the future. It's not safe, Vaughn." Vaughn pointed a thumb at Zach, making a face like the Jerry Mouse meme. "Okay, Dad." He quickly took a warm shower and brewed a cup of instant coffee. Feeling human again, he jumped onto his bed, ready to unravel his rewards. System. Status. Superstar system. Stata panel. Bio. Name. Vaughn Varley. Age. 18. Class. Student. Title. Street performer. System level 0. Stats. Vocals. E. 0/30ths. Composition. F. 0 DCM. Charm. C. 0 centième. Willpower. C. 0/300ths. Progression. Skills. Basic instrument mastery. Resonance. EXP. 600. Current fans. 50. Quests. Unavailable. Star Shop. 6 vouchers. Vaughn tapped on his new title. Street performer. You stand out in chaotic environments. Whenever equipped, crowds are 20% less likely to interrupt or protest your performance. Vaughn didn't know what had gotten him the title. He had just received it out of the blue while performing earlier today. As a reward for obtaining his first title, the system had rewarded him with 100 EXP and 3-star vouchers. He couldn't say no to free rewards, so he accepted them without questions. His eyes drifted to his charm and willpower. They had skyrocketed. His charm had risen naturally alongside his ridiculous physical transformation. While most of the transformation came from Vaughn's new habits, the system's strange daily quest rewards had a heavy hand to play. Pills like the metabolism booster made him burn calories like a furnace while working out, and the stamina recovery pill ensured he was never left breathless. It was a dream for anyone who wanted to lose weight. Even Zach, who saw him every day, looked at him with confusion sometimes, unable to comprehend the speed of the change. Once his physique stabilized, the system had stopped giving him workout quests. Instead, it had pivoted to singing or casual challenges. Between the system's EXP rewards and Zach's relentless coaching, Vaughn had improved. Zach had drilled the importance of authenticity into him. "You don't have the range yet," Zach would say. "So don't try to hit the high notes. Focus on control. Focus on the emotion. If you can't sing it perfectly, sing it honestly." It had helped immensely, and Vaughn was grateful to his roommate. But now, staring at 600 EXP, he knew he was going to make the biggest improvement before the big day tomorrow. Actually, he checked the time. It was past 12 a.m. "The big day is today," Vaughn corrected himself. "The Miami auditions." His first instinct was to dump all 600 EXP into vocals. He wasn't composing real originals yet, so composition was useless. He needed a better voice to survive the judges, but he had another option: skills. Vaughn chewed his lip. It was a tough decision. Pure stats versus utility. Think, Vaughn, think. He realized something. The new skill he just got from the quest, resonance, amplified emotional projection. If he combined that with emote to assume a fake emotion and then make everyone relate to it, it's the perfect combo for a performer, Vaughn realized. He made his choice. He would buy the skill and dump the rest into vocals. He used a voucher, and the holographic case unfolded like before. Consumable, complete instrument mastery. Cost, 1000 EXP. Skill, emote, saved. Cost, 300 EXP. Requirement, vocals E. Consumable, zone state. Description: enters a state of extreme focus, the zone, for 1 hour where processing speed and creativity peaks. Cost, 1000 EXP. Grade, A. Vaughn almost choked at the third one. Zone state? That was legendary. He stared at it and was tempted already, but 1000 EXP was impossible right now. "Wow," he breathed. "I'm definitely saving that for later." He selected emote. A small, white fruit, no bigger than a grape, appeared in his hand. Vaughn popped it into his mouth, and it dissolved instantly. This time, there was no electric shock, just a cool feeling settling behind his eyes. Skill acquired. Emote. He looked at his remaining 300 EXP and dumped it all into vocals. Vocals, D plus 0/100ths, EXP, DS. He remembered the man who had paid him to stop singing. That guy had been a D-. "I can't believe I've surpassed that guy already," Vaughn laughed. "Oh well. We keep moving." He turned off the lamp, lying back on his pillow with a peaceful smile. Chapter 96. Features. Well, from a marketing perspective, we do have the budget to pay for independent verses. If we want this album to chart highly on a global scale, we need at least 1 or 2 medium to large artists to feature on it. I've been receiving lots of emails from managers and A&R reps, and so I've singled out 5 different artists who actively want to ride the Masquerade hype. We could go over them and pick the 2 with the best demographics. Vaughn didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, his violet eyes locked onto the blank whiteboard. "Well," Vaughn finally said, capping the marker and tapping it against his chin. "I have a few composed songs already, and indeed I am strongly considering collaborations. But I don't want to just buy features from people who wouldn't look twice at me a month ago," Vaughn said slowly, his mind already spinning with the overarching narrative of the independent king. "It's how the game works," Emily reasoned. "Cross-pollination of fan bases. If you get a pop star with 2 million followers to drop a verse for you, their fans automatically become your fans. It guarantees the numbers." "I get the math, Em." Vaughn didn't back down. "But it goes against the entire brand we're building. The internet loves me right now because I fought the establishment. I took down Julian West. I walked away from Diana Sterling and one of the biggest labels in the world. If my debut album is just stuffed with generic industry names and paid clout chasers, I become exactly like them." Patch nodded from the mixing console, not even looking away from his screen. He's right, Em. The streets respect authenticity above all else. If you buy a verse from some clout chaser who doesn't even fit Vaughn's vibe, the core fans will smell it a mile away. Emily sighed, tapping her stylus against her tablet. She knew they had a point, even if it made her job harder. So what's the alternative, Vaughn? Would you rather go entirely solo on all 10 songs? I won't go solo, Vaughn said, looking back at the board. I'll bring up some of my own. He thought back to the talents he had the pleasure of being friends with from Project Star and pressed the marker to the board, writing the word Feeders in bold. Beneath the header, he began writing out the names that could form his new album. 1. Aura Nova. 2. Alex Hall. 3. Connor Prince. 4. Midnight Pulse. Leo Carter. 5. Noah Billy. Emily's eyes widened as she recognized some of the names Vaughn was writing down. Vaughn capped the marker and turned around, directing a knowing look to his manager. He tapped the very top of the list. You should be very familiar with this first name, M. Of course, Emily knew Aura. Long before she had discovered Vaughn's growth trend, her eye had been locked onto the blue-haired girl. Aura Nova was a generational talent who had somehow slipped through the cracks. Emily leaned back on the leather couch, crossing her legs. It's not a bad idea to collaborate with her. Honestly, I think it's perfect. Your voices would blend incredibly well. Have you discussed it with her? No, Vaughn sighed. Unfortunately, for some time now, her lines haven't been available. I don't really know how she's doing after the show wrapped, so I'm going to need you to work your magic and help me reach her. Emily nodded her head slowly, pulling up a blank memo on her tablet. That shouldn't be a problem. I'll see how it goes and track her down. Upon Emily's agreement, they moved down the list. Alex Hall. Patch repeated absent-mindedly from the mixing console, spinning slowly in his ergonomic chair. He frowned. Who is that? Emily tried to think for a moment, but finally shook her head. I don't think I know that one. He was on Project Star, Vaughn explained, leaning against the whiteboard. He actually finished third in the Hollywood round, but he unfortunately got eliminated from the choreography round. Ah, yes, the typical industry execution. If you can't dance, you can't sing, Emily sighed. Exactly, Vaughn nodded. I haven't really contacted him all this while, but hopefully he's able to connect once I reach out to him. I'll be responsible for making that call for now. Emily nodded and said, Oh, I see. Well, someone at his caliber will definitely help diversify the album's sound. But internally, Vaughn had entirely different reasons for picking Alex Hall. He would never forget the sheer brilliance of the guy's hidden skill. He could make listeners almost literally see the music as it was played, and Vaughn believed it had far too much potential, so he refused to let it go to waste just because he got rejected. The third name is another unfamiliar one, Vaughn continued, pointing at Connor Prince. He's not a vocal powerhouse like Alex or Aura. Honestly, he got eliminated as early as Hollywood Week, but I made him a promise back in the dorms. I told him if I made it, I'd bring him up, and I'll be needing his drum skills for one of the tracks. He's another person I'll have to reach out to myself. Emily nodded once again. Okay, not bad. As for the fourth, she looked at Midnight Pulse. I guess you still plan on collaborating with them on the rock song they accused you of stealing? Vaughn nodded with a smile. Yup. I've felt for a while now that the song will be far better sung as an actual band rather than a solo act. It really needs Leo and his crew. So, this is something I'm willing to give a serious shot. So, Emily trailed off, her eyes dropping to the final name on the board. Do you plan on doing the same with Noah Billy? Noah Billy was a complicated figure in Vaughn's recent history. He was a stranger who had aggressively contacted Vaughn's team in the past, publicly claiming that his phone was stolen and that Vaughn had plagiarized a track he just began writing. Unfortunately for Noah, Vaughn had ironclad proof. Vaughn had recorded himself singing "You're Gonna Come Home" and had even been seen busking it on the Miami roads long before he had ever set foot in the Project Star dorms. Because Vaughn's future knowledge allowed him to write the song before Noah actually conceived it, Noah couldn't form a solid legal case and faded into obscurity. But Vaughn's reason for trying to involve him now wasn't born out of guilt or sympathy. He knew who Noah would turn out to be from his past life. The man was a phenomenal songwriter. He had a massive amount of positive potential that was currently just rotting away in anger. I won't feature him on You're Gonna Come Home, Vaughn said firmly, establishing his boundary. That's my track. That'll remain a solo song. Instead, I want the two of us to lock in a room and make another song entirely from scratch. Emily slowly nodded at the idea. Interesting. She wanted to lay her doubts on the table, to argue that taking a chance on 5 absolute nobodies was a massive commercial risk, but the quiet, imposing confidence Vaughn radiated was enough to make her trust him. She had seen him do the impossible too many times to bet against him now. "Is that all of them?" Emily asked. "Yeah, they're more than enough," Vaughn confirmed, tossing the marker onto the tray. "That's 5 possible features. I'll fill in the remaining tracks with solo songs, and even if not all of these collaborations manage to pick up mainstream traction, I'll still be good that way. The album will have soul. Are you absolutely sure you don't want to consider even one major industry feature?" Emily pressed gently, giving it one last try, just as a safety net. "I'm sure," Vaughn shook his head. "This is more than enough for me. Right now, I want to focus purely on making new music. We build the house first, then we invite the guests." Patch clapped his hands together suddenly. "All right, bet. We'll start contacting the features tomorrow. But for now, Vaughn, you said you've composed a few songs already. Let's not waste this lockout. Step up to the mic and let's have a listen." Vaughn waved at them in agreement before turning and stepping toward the heavy, soundproof glass door of the vocal booth, which had been calling to him like a siren ever since he walked into Studio A. As he walked, he mentally pulled up his interface. Chapter 97. Calling Old Friends. 1. Superstar System. Stata Panel. Bio. Name: Vaughn Varley. Age: 18. Class: Student. Title: Uncrowned King. Equipped: Street Performer. System Level: 1. Stats: Vocals: B. 145 1/1000ths. Composition: D+. 15 centième. Charm: B. 10 1/1000ths. Willpower: C. 0 300ths. Progression: Skills: Basic Instrument Mastery, Resonance D, Emote B, Advanced Choreography Mastery B, EXP 4,080. Current fans: 280,991. Quests: 2 available. Star Shop: 55 vouchers. Vaughn looked at his pool of unspent experience points, and a small smile lit up his face. His rapidly growing popularity had broken more fan-gain milestones over the last few weeks thanks to the viral explosion of Masquerade. He had purposely chosen to save all the rewarded EXP, wanting to see the effect of a massive, sudden upgrade all at once. Now, standing in a $200,000 studio, it was time to cash in. With a quick, decisive thought, he commanded the system. He spent exactly 1,855 EXP from his pool, dumping it entirely into his primary weapon. A warm, electric sensation instantly flooded his throat. It felt like his vocal cords were being bathed in warm honey, tightening, refining, and expanding their physical limits. Stat upgraded. Vocals: B+, 0 1/1000ths. Vaughn exhaled slowly, feeling the newly unlocked resonance vibrating in his chest cavity. He wanted it to enter the Elite A bounds so badly, but he forced himself to hold back. He planned to save his remaining points to boost his severely lacking composition stat for the upcoming writing sessions, and probably invest in another zone state pill from the Star Shop if he hit a wall. "Yo, Vaughn, you good in there?" Patch's voice crackled through the studio monitors, interrupting his internal zoning out. Vaughn had been standing completely still with his hand on the booth door for some long seconds now. "Yeah, sorry," Vaughn called back, pulling the heavy glass door open and stepping inside. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, the world vanished. The acoustic isolation of Studio A's booth was absolute. It felt like stepping into a vacuum. There was no hum of the air conditioner, not even the faint rustle of Emily shifting on the leather couch, just pure silence. He stepped up to the vintage Sony C800G microphone, adjusting the heavy pop filter. It felt incredibly right. "Just lay down a rough melody," Patch instructed through the headphones clamped over Vaughn's ears. "Let's see what we're working with." Metronome is running now. A steady click track began ticking in Vaughn's ears. He closed his eyes, centering himself. He didn't need a beat yet. He just needed to set the emotional foundation. Taking a deep breath, Vaughn engaged his newly upgraded vocals. He simultaneously triggered his emote and resonance skills, forcing the raw emotion of longing and isolation to coat every single syllable he was about to produce. He opened his mouth and sang a cappella. "The only time I sat and waited for the sunrise was when I saw the fear of leaving in your brown eyes." Out in the control room, Emily's pen paused. Just the first 2 lines were enough for her to notice the increase in his tonal quality. In the booth, Vaughn kept his eyes closed, fully surrendering to the music. "This is just a separation, babe. It's all fine." Making quiet calculations on the long drive. By the time he finished the verse, Patches was staring at the mixing console with his hands on his chin. He slowly reached out and hit the talkback button. Bro, what did you just do to your voice? I mixed your vocals 3 weeks ago. It didn't sound anything like this. It's so much better now. Vaughn opened his eyes, a confident smirk playing on his lips as he looked through the thick studio glass at his stunned team. It's good news for the album, isn't it? Vaughn asked casually. Patch stared at him for a second longer before a massive, manic grin split across his face. He frantically started adjusting the EQ knobs on the 72-channel board. Of course it's good news. Whatever it is you just did, keep doing it. Don't change a single thing. Can you go again? I'm laying a heavy acoustic loop under it right now. Run it back, Vaughn said, leaning into the mic. And just like that, the first single of the album had begun shaping up. Far away from Venetian islands, the reality of the music industry was a lot less glamorous. In a dive bar in downtown Seattle, Noah Billy was aggressively wiping down the counter with a rag that smelled like his broken dreams. His life had been in a free fall for the past 3 months. It all started with a song, You're Gonna Come Home. Noah had sworn on his life that he had written that track. But when he tried to take it to the internet, claiming the sudden viral sensation Vaughn Varley had stolen his phone and his music, it had backfired spectacularly. Vaughn's legal team hadn't even needed to sweat. They produced time-stamped videos of Vaughn busking the exact song on the streets of Miami weeks before Noah had even conceptualized it. The internet had branded Noah a delusional clout chaser. The backlash had ruined him. The legal fees from his frivolous lawsuit had drained his meager savings account to zero. He had to sell his recording equipment just to make rent. And then, Lena left. His girlfriend hadn't left him because he was broke. She had left him because the obsession had hollowed him out. She couldn't handle the late nights of him pacing the apartment, drinking cheap whiskey and cursing Vaughn Varley's name. She couldn't handle watching a talented, bright-eyed musician give up just to wallow in bitterness. The day she packed her bags, Noah had shoved his guitar into the back of his closet and hadn't touched it since. Now, he was 22, completely unrecognized, and pouring cheap beer for construction workers just to afford instant noodles. Deep in his pocket, his cheap smartphone began to vibrate. Noah ignored it, tossing the damp rag into the sink. It had been ringing off and on for the last 2 hours. It was an unknown number with a Florida area code. He just assumed it was another aggressive debt collector trying to squeeze blood from a stone. Closing time, Noah muttered to the empty room, turning off the signs and locking the heavy front door. He grabbed 2 heavy bags of trash from the kitchen and pushed his way out through the back exit into the cold alleyway. A light drizzle was falling, soaking through his thin hoodie. He threw the trash bags into the dumpster and leaned against the cold brick wall of the alley, pulling a crushed pack of cigarettes from his pocket. Just as he put one between his lips, his phone started vibrating again. Miami, Florida. Noah gritted his teeth, his temper finally snapping. He pulled the phone from his pocket and swiped the green button, pressing it to his ear. Listen to me, Noah barked. I don't have the money. Calling me at midnight isn't going to magically make $5,000 appear in my bank account, so stop harassing. Noah Billy, a calm, smooth voice interrupted on the other end of the line. Noah froze. The cigarette slipped from his lips and tumbled into the wet pavement. He knew that voice. He had heard it on the radio, on television, and in his nightmares for the last months. Who is this? It's Vaughn Varley, independent artist and CEO of Absolute Records. A hot surge of anger boiled up in Noah's chest. You, Noah intoned. You've got some absolute nerve calling my number. You stole my song. You ruined my life. Why the hell would I ever want to speak to you? We've been over this before, dude. Vaughn's voice remained unbothered by the outburst. I'm not here to exchange words and waste my time with you over the past. Then why are you calling me? Because I'm recording my debut studio album, Vaughn said simply, and I'd like the 2 of us to work on one of its tracks, together. Noah blinked, the rain matting his hair to his forehead. The anger was suddenly derailed by confusion. What? You want to collaborate with me? Why me? Because despite your attitude, you have a talent that the industry is lacking right now. I don't want to feature you on You're Gonna Come Home. That's my solo track. I want to fly you down here, put you in a room with me, and we create a brand new acoustic anthem entirely from scratch. Chapter 98, Calling Old Friends, 2. Noah didn't buy his praise, so he let out a hollow, bitter laugh. Right, so you can steal that one too. I'm not doing it. I'm done with music. In return for your time, Vaughn continued, completely ignoring Noah's refusal, Absolute Records will pay you a $15,000 flat feature fee up front. We cover your flights, we put you up in a luxury hotel in South Beach for the week, and you get a 5% writing split on the back-end royalties of the song. Noah's breath caught in his throat. $15,000. He stood paralyzed in the freezing alleyway. That was more money than he will make pouring drinks in an entire year. That was enough to pay off his legal debts, move out of his roach-infested apartment, and actually breathe again. Plus back-end royalties on a Billboard Top 3 artist's debut album. It was a golden lottery ticket being handed to him by the man he hated most in the world. Before Noah's stunned brain could even formulate a single syllable to respond, Vaughn's calm voice cut through the static one last time. "If you want to make real music, text me on Photogram by midnight if you're interested." Noah slowly lowered the phone, staring at the cracked screen as the cold Seattle rain washed over him, completely speechless. He shoved the phone into his pocket and pushed off the brick wall, walking the 6 blocks back to his apartment. Walking past his kitchen and standing in the center of his tiny living room, he looked at his closet. Slowly, with trembling hands, he slid the closet door open. Pushed all the way to the back, hidden behind a pile of dirty laundry and winter coats, was a black, hard-shell guitar case. He hadn't opened it since the day Sarah packed her bags and walked out the front door. He pulled the case out, laid it flat on his unmade mattress, and unlatched the silver clasps. Inside rested his worn Yamaha acoustic guitar. The wood was slightly scuffed from years of playing in dive bars and open mic nights. The strings were dead and tarnished. But as Noah reached out and brushed his thumb across the strings, the soft, out-of-tune chord echoed in the quiet room, sending a painful, familiar jolt of electricity straight to his heart. He missed it. God, he missed making music, so much hurt him. He pulled his cracked phone from his wet pocket and checked the time. 11:42 p.m. Pride was a luxury for people who could afford their rent. Noah Billy couldn't. He opened the Photogram app. His own profile was a wasteland of hate comments from Vaughn's loyal fanbase, but he ignored it. He typed Vaughn Varley's name into the search bar. The official page popped up instantly, a verified blue checkmark sitting proudly next to a massive follower count of 2.1 million. Noah opened the direct messages. His thumbs hovered over the digital keyboard for a few seconds. He swallowed hard, throwing his pride away, and typed, "I'm in, thanks for the opportunity, bro." Noah dropped the phone onto the bed next to his guitar, let out a long exhale, and buried his face in his hands. He didn't know if he was making a deal with the devil, but for the first time in 6 months, he felt a genuine spark of hope. 3,000 miles away, it was nearing 3 a.m. in South Beach. Inside the acoustic fortress of Studio A, the heavy, thumping bass line of a new track rattled the dark wood paneling. Vaughn stepped out of the vocal booth, pulling his headphones down around his neck, a light sheen of sweat glistening on his forehead. He had just spent the last 2 hours doing relentless vocal drills, pushing his upgraded vocals to the absolute limit. He walked over to the massive SSL mixing console where Patch was hunched over, his eyes glued to the dual monitors as his fingers rapidly adjusted the EQ levels. Vaughn's phone, resting next to the soundboard, suddenly lit up with a notification. Vaughn picked it up, swiped the lock screen, and a slow, triumphant smirk spread across his face. He turned the screen around and tapped the glass, showing it to Emily, who was curled up on the leather couch with a cup of black coffee and her Vanguard tablet. "We got the Seattle kid," Vaughn announced, tossing the phone back onto the desk. "Noah Billy is officially on the roster." Emily let out a long breath, setting her coffee down on the glass table. "You actually got the guy who tried to publicly sue you for plagiarism. You are an absolute menace, Vaughn." Vaughn smirked, taking a sip from his water bottle. "I knew he was a smart guy." "All right," Emily said, her executive persona immediately taking the reins as she picked up her Vanguard tablet. "So I'll take over from here. I'll have Zach draft the standard feature agreements, the strict NDAs, and the 5% back-end royalty contracts by morning. I'll also coordinate with his local airport in Seattle to get him a ticket down here. What about the others? Have we heard back from the rest of the board?" Vaughn nodded, leaning back against the heavy SSL console and crossing his arms. "Every single one of them," Vaughn confirmed, the satisfaction evident in his voice. Alex Hall had been working dead-end retail since the show ended. Connor Prince is completely on board, and Leo's rock band is stranded with a broken-down van in Ohio, so the upfront cash was a literal lifesaver for them. They've all sent out replies already, and every single one of them is interested. They're hungry to prove the industry wrong. "That's fantastic from a PR standpoint," Emily noted. "But practically speaking, we can't welcome them all at once. Studio A is massive, but having 4 different feature artists in here at the exact same time is going to be a creative nightmare. We need staggered lock-ins. We're done with You're Gonna Come Home and the rough solo skeletons already, so what's the schedule for the rest of the tracks?" Vaughn's eyes lit up in agreement. Good idea. Let's map it out. He pushed off the console, walked over to the rolling whiteboard in the corner of the room, and uncapped the black dry erase marker. The satisfying squeak of the felt tip echoed through the acoustically treated room as he wiped a clean section on the right side of the board and began to write out the official recording timeline. July 10th, 16. You're gonna come home. Complete. July 17th, 24. Track 2, Noah. August 1st, 7. Track 3, Leo and Company. August 8th, 15. Track 4, Connor Prince. August 16th, 23. Track 5, Alex Hall. Vaughn stopped, capping the marker and stepping back so Emily and Patch could see the board clearly. It's a tight window for each, but with the beats Patch is cooking up, it's more than enough time to lay down the vocals, Vaughn explained, gesturing to the dates. I have contacted all of them already, laid out the vision, and they're all looking forward to working with us. We have the momentum. We just need to execute. The triumphant, fast-paced energy in the room sobered slightly. Now, all that's left is Aura. She's the utmost priority for me on this album. Her voice is the anchor I need to balance out all this acoustic and rock energy. Any news? Emily paused with a complicated look on her face. About that, Emily started, choosing her words carefully. I actually managed to reach her. It took calling in a few favors, but I finally got a hold of her. And? Vaughn pressed. I couldn't learn much over the phone, Emily admitted, shaking her head slightly. She was incredibly guarded about her current situation. But I did learn one major detail. She's not an independent free agent like the rest of the guys on your list. She's signed to Cloudery Holdings as of now. Vaughn couldn't forget the label company owned by Rex Sterling and backing the Project Star contest. But, Emily quickly added, holding up a hand before Vaughn could process the roadblock. She's open to meeting and discussing the feature with you, though. Just you, personally. She's flying into the city tomorrow for some label business and asked to meet at the Sete Hotel Cafe here in South Beach. She really wishes you'll have time to spare. Chapter 99. Meeting Aura. The following afternoon, the Miami sun beat down on the sleek, matte black hood of the Cadillac Escalade as it cruised down Collins Avenue. Zach tapped his fingers against the leather steering wheel, glancing at Vaughn through the rearview mirror. Vaughn was dressed sharply but casually in a lightweight, dark linen button-down and tailored trousers. He looked less like a 19-year-old kid. The Setai Hotel, Zach muttered, reading the GPS. Cloudery Holdings doesn't mess around. That's a 5-star, ultra-luxury resort. Just be careful, Vaughn. You might think you know Rex Sterling, but he's still a shark. If Aura is signed directly to his holding company, there's going to be a lot of corporate red tape around her. I'm not worried, Vaughn replied smoothly, adjusting his dark sunglasses. I'm not walking in there to fight Rex Sterling. I'm just going to talk to a friend. Zach pulled the massive SUV up to the valet stand of the Setai. The hotel was an architectural masterpiece, an oasis of zen-like calm amidst the chaotic energy of South Beach. Towering bronze doors, antique gray bricks, and the soothing sound of flowing water from serene pools greeted him. Vaughn stepped out, giving Zach a quick nod, and walked through the grand lobby. Emily had texted him the exact table number. He bypassed the bustling main restaurant and walked out into the lush, open-air courtyard. Tall palm trees provided deep, cooling shade over private tables separated by pristine water features. Sitting at a secluded corner table, sipping an iced matcha latte, was Aura Nova. Vaughn stopped for a brief second, genuinely taking in the sight. The glow-up was undeniable. She wore a chic, tailored white blazer over a silk camisole. Her iconic blue hair, which used to be tied up in messy buns, was now professionally styled into sleek, sharp waves that caught the sunlight. She radiated health, wealth, and confidence. As Vaughn approached, Aura looked up. Her eyes widened, and a massive grin broke across her face. She immediately stood up and pulled Vaughn into a tight, fierce hug. "Look at you," Aura laughed, stepping back and holding him by the shoulders. "The independent king in the flesh. I didn't think you could pull off the linen look, but you're making it work. And look at you." Vaughn smiled warmly, taking the seat across from her. "You look incredible, Aura." "Thank you." Aura sighed happily and took her seat. A waiter soon appeared, and Vaughn ordered an iced Americano. Once they were alone again, the air between them settled into a comfortable, nostalgic rhythm. They were two war veterans who had survived the trenches of reality television and come out on the other side. "I have to say it in person," Aura said in a hushed tone. "What you did at the Masquerade launch exposing Julian on the live stream, dropping the song independently, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It was a gamble, but it paid off. Julian got what was coming to him." Vaughn chuckled, stirring his coffee. Though, it took some time for me to get a hold of you. What actually happened after the finale? You just vanished. It wasn't anything much, honestly, Aura explained. My plan was to originally use the prize money to release some songs independently, but it just wasn't enough, coupled with my personal needs and all I wasn't expecting much. But then Cloudery Holdings contacted me. They had missed out on Julian because of his father's label, and for some reason they didn't want you. So I was given a really good offer and didn't hesitate to accept. And really, I don't regret that decision. You couldn't contact me because I had to start afresh with new details and accounts. It was one of the things they required of me to cut ties with the past. Aura, that's incredible, Vaughn said genuinely. You deserve every bit of that. You have one of the best voices in the current generation. Vaughn wasn't lying. She was truly talented, and using Inspect on her, Vaughn could tell she had gotten better yet again. Name, Aura Nova. Vocals, A. Skill, title hymn. Description. The user's music mimics the restorative flow of the ocean, projecting raw emotion that heals the soul. It was clear she had undergone professional training across the past few months, and that was all it took for her to leap all the way from B+ to A. That was really impressive. Judge Aria, who was one of the greatest pop singers of the generation, was an A+ after all, and Aura was one step from there. Aura smiled, but it was tinged with some sadness. She looked down at the table. Which brings me to why I asked to meet you here, instead of just flying to the studio, Aura said softly. She looked back up, her eyes pleading with him to understand. Vaughn, I want to be on your album. I really truly do. The idea of us getting in a booth together and making a track sounds like a dream. But I can't. It's the exclusivity clause in my new contract, Aura explained. Cloudery Holdings just invested millions into my rebrand. They are currently prepping my debut solo album for a massive fourth-quarter release. Because of that, their legal team placed a strict embargo on me. I am legally barred from doing any features, collaborations, or guest appearances for the next 4 months. She reached across the table, briefly resting her hand over Vaughn's. They want my first official release to be 100% mine, she said. Plus, Rex explicitly told me he wants me completely distanced from the project Star Drama. Since you are currently in a public war with World West Records, Cloudery doesn't want me caught in the crossfire before my album even drops. I'm so sorry, Vaughn. I feel like I'm abandoning you. Vaughn looked at her hand, then looked up into her anxious eyes. Instead of looking disappointed, a slow, proud smile spread across his face. Aura, take a breath. You aren't abandoning me. She was surprised by how calm he was. You aren't mad? Mad? Why would I be mad? Vaughn chuckled softly. You played the game perfectly. You secured a massive bag, you got creative control, and you protected your brand. That exclusivity clause is standard industry practice for a major label debut. It's exactly what I would advise you to do if I were your manager. Aura let out a massive breath, the tension completely draining from her shoulders. God, I was so terrified you'd think I was selling out. You're a CEO of your own brand now, Aura, Vaughn said, raising his iced coffee in a mock toast. We both have empires to build. My album is going to be fine. I've already secured Alex and Connor for features. Aura's jaw dropped. Whoa, you really brought back your old buddies. That's really nice of you, and the media is going to lose their minds when they see that track list. That's the plan, Vaughn smirked. Well, Aura said with her usual competitive spark returning to her eyes. Since I can't be on this album, I guess I'll just have to beat you on the Billboard charts when my solo project drops. You can certainly try, Vaughn laughed, the familiar, friendly rivalry from their dorm days flaring back to life. Let's make a promise, Aura suddenly said. About 5 months from now, my embargo lifts. By then, our debuts will be finalized. Once the red tape is gone, you and I lock in a studio and write a massive global single together. Vaughn's confidence didn't dim. He believed it was truly possible. It's a promise, he agreed with a smirk. We'll break the internet. Aura beamed, the heavy business talk finally out of the way. She quickly finished the last of her matcha latte and leaned forward, her eyes gleaming mischievously. So are we just going to sit here and chat? There's a private VIP lounge upstairs with a massive screen and a fully loaded PS4 Pro if you still want to try beating me. Vaughn's eyes flared like a child hearing a challenge. He hadn't forgotten how badly she used to beat him in the Star Mansion, and he had never gotten his revenge. Bet, he said instantly, standing up to join her. For almost an hour, they continued playing games in the suite, and unfortunately for Vaughn, he kept losing every single time. It pained his pride, but he quickly blamed it on abandoning his gaming side for so long because of all the music work. They could have played for much longer, but Aura soon had to go for a meeting with her managers. By the time they saw each other off at the stand, Vaughn was still happy. He had a genuinely great time catching up, even if he couldn't get her on board for the album. But as he stepped back into the Escalade and the doors shut, his smile faded into a look of absolute focus. Now, it was time to lock the fuck in. The next 3 months were going to be merciless. Chapter 100. Working with Noah. 1. Miami International Airport was a sensory overload for a guy who had spent the last 6 months hiding in the perpetually gray, rain-soaked corners of Seattle. Noah Billy stepped through the sliding glass doors of the arrivals terminal, and the Florida humidity hit him right away. He squinted against the blinding midday sun, dragging a battered duffel bag over his shoulder. In his other hand, he tightly gripped the handle of his scuffed hardshell guitar case. With his long, messy brown hair tied back into a loose knot, a scruffy beard, a faded flannel shirt, and worn-out combat boots, Noah looked entirely out of place among the tourists in pastel linen and designer sunglasses. He looked exactly like what he was, a broke, grungy indie folk musician who had just been handed a winning lottery ticket. A sleek, matte black Cadillac Escalade ESV Platinum pulled up to the curb, its tinted windows completely concealing the interior. The driver's side door opened, and Zach Tuna stepped out. Dressed in a sharp, tailored navy suit with a silver tie clip, the young head of legal looked like a corporate shark. Zach walked around the hood, sizing up the long-haired Seattle native. "Noah Billy?" Zach asked, extending a hand. "I'm Zachary Tuna, head of legal for Absolute Records. Welcome to Miami." Noah quickly shifted his guitar case to shake the lawyer's hand. His grip was firm. "Thanks, man. Seriously, it's a lot to take in." "My client is currently at the studio," Zach replied smoothly, gesturing for one of the airport porters to take Noah's duffel bag, though Noah stubbornly refused to let go of his guitar case. "I'm here to provide your transport. We have a suite booked for you at the Sitaya for the week, but Vaughn requested we head straight to the facility first. He wants to get right to work." Noah climbed into the spacious, air-conditioned rear cabin of the Escalade, feeling completely alienated by the absurd luxury. The leather captain's chairs had massage functions. There was a chilled bottle of sparkling water waiting in the cup holder. As Zach merged the massive SUV onto the sun-drenched causeway, Noah stared out the tinted window at the yachts docked in Biscayne Bay. His stomach twisted into a tight knot, but this time, it wasn't out of anger. It was pure, overwhelming imposter syndrome. He had spent the last half-year pouring cheap beer in a dive bar, completely giving up on his dreams. And now the guy he had wrongly accused of stealing his song was flying him first class to sing on a highly anticipated debut album. Von Varley had looked past the lawsuit, past the internet drama, and saw his talent. The sheer grace of that gesture made Noah want to prove he belonged here. 15 minutes later, the Escalade pulled through the security gates of Neon Sound Studios. Zach led Noah through the heavy glass doors, down the platinum-lined hallway, and swiped a black RFID card against the scanner for Studio A. The heavy, soundproofed door clicked and hissed open. The air inside the studio was cool. Emily was sitting on the leather couch, typing rapidly on her Vanguard tablet. Patch was hunched over the massive 72-channel SSL mixing console, tweaking a drum loop, and standing by the vocal booth, holding a cup of hot tea, was Von Varley. Von didn't look like the polished pop star Noah expected. He wore dark, loose-fitting streetwear and carried a quiet, imposing authority. Noah stopped in the doorway, suddenly feeling incredibly small in the multi-million-dollar room. "Noah," Vaughn said, setting his tea down and walking over. He extended a hand and a welcoming smile on his face. "Glad you made the flight." Noah looked at the hand, then up at Vaughn's striking violet eyes. He reached out and shook it firmly. "Vaughn, man, I don't even know what to say," Noah breathed roughly. He looked around the incredible studio. "Thank you for the advance, the flight, for giving me this shot after everything. You really didn't have to do this." "You're here because you have a gift, Noah," Vaughn replied smoothly, completely dismissing any lingering awkwardness about the past. "The industry is missing your kind of soul. I want it on my album. We're here to build your future. Are you ready to work?" Noah nodded vigorously, setting his guitar case down on the floor. "More than ready. Just point me to a mic." "Good," Vaughn smiled, gesturing to the room. "This is Patch, my producer, and Emily, my manager. Take a seat on the couch, let's tune up. As Noah walked over to the leather sofa and unlatched his hardshell case, Vaughn took a step back, his curiosity getting the better of him. He hadn't used his system on the Seattle native yet. With a quick mental command, Vaughn activated Inspect. A translucent blue screen materialized in his vision, hovering just over Noah's shoulder as the grunge artist carefully lifted his scuffed Yamaha. Name, Noah Billy. Vocals, B. Skill, rustic storyteller, B. Description. The user's acoustic melodies naturally evoke deep nostalgia, anchoring the listener's emotions to the organic sound of the instrument. Vaughn nodded subtly. A solid B in vocals was incredible for an untrained artist who spent his life playing in dive bars. Combined with that specific, high-tier acoustic skill, it explained exactly why Noah's future music felt so undeniably raw and authentic. But then, the system interface did something it had never done before. A secondary, smaller notification popped up, highlighting the beat-up, scratched wooden guitar in Noah's hands, with a faint golden glow that only Vaughn could see. Item detected. Weathered Yamaha acoustic. Status, soul-bound, Noah Billy. Effect. The instrument has absorbed years of the user's grief and passion. When played by the bound user, it passively boosts emotional projection by 20%. If played by anyone else, the strings will sound dead, muted, and entirely off-pitch. Vaughn blinked, genuinely surprised. He didn't even know the system could appraise physical instruments, let alone classify one as soul-bound. It was a testament to how much Noah had poured his actual life into that cheap piece of wood. From across the room, Patch turned around in his ergonomic chair, eyeing the heavily scratched guitar. "Yo, Noah," Patch called out, pointing a thumb toward a glass display case near the vocal booth. "We've got a custom Martin the 500th 28 in the back room. You want me to pull it out for the track so we get a cleaner sound?" Noah paused, his hand resting protectively over the tarnished strings of his Yamaha. He looked at the multi-million-dollar equipment surrounding him, then down at his lap. "Nah, man, I appreciate it," Noah said, shaking his head stubbornly. "But I need to use this one. The expensive stuff is nice, but me and this guitar, we've been through too much. The wood already knows the songs. It just feels right." Patch looked a bit skeptical, opening his mouth to argue about audio fidelity and studio standards. But Vaughn immediately raised a hand to cut his producer off. "Let him use his," Vaughn said, a knowing smirk on his face as he looked at the golden glow still radiating from the instrument in his vision. "The expensive stuff doesn't always have a soul. That guitar does. Mic it up just the way it is." Noah looked up at Vaughn with gratitude in his tired eyes. Vaughn wasn't just paying him, he actually respected his artistry. "All right," Vaughn said, sitting down on the opposite end of the couch with a blank notebook. It was time to match Noah's level. With a quick thought, Vaughn allocated a massive chunk of his saved EXP to boost his own composition. Composition, D+, 15 centième. EXP, 2260. Stat upgrade. Composition, B, 0 milliem. EXP, 1275. A sudden, clarifying rush of musical theory flooded Vaughn's brain. Chord progressions, complex time signatures, and lyrical structures suddenly clicked into place like a perfectly solved puzzle. "All right," Vaughn said, sitting down on the opposite end of the couch with a blank notebook. "I want a song that starts off feeling like a lonely campfire in the freezing cold, but by the time the chorus hits, it sounds like a sold-out stadium stomping their feet." Patch spun around in his chair. "I have a drum skeleton ready. Heavy kick drum, raw tempo." He hit the spacebar, and a slow, echoing heartbeat began to thump through the massive studio monitors. "I have this concept," Vaughn started, tapping his pen against his notebook. He was pulling fragments of a massive hit he remembered from his past life. He barely remembered the song, but from his knowledge it was another song Noah had written in the future, and it perfectly fit the vibe of the album.